Augustine followed closely behind Grosk along the main road of the town. Thanks to the grace of understanding bestowed upon him by the Lord, he could clearly sense the stares directed his way. Some were laced with malice, drawn by his striking appearance. Others were more cautious, watchful eyes assessing, observing. He ignored them all. "Tell me more about those two individuals," Augustine said calmly, eyes forward. Grosk, briefly caught off guard, nodded and began. "The first one is Jason Todd, a mercenary. Brutal, but a man of his word. He arrived in Rhea about a year ago. From what I've heard, he's been hunting down the people responsible for his family's murder. The second is a hitman named Jack. Strange fellow. Comes and goes as he pleases, only appearing when there's a job worth his while. According to him, as long as the price is right, he'd even kill the king." Gross gave a half-hearted shrug. "As for the others around here, you could probably hire them for a winning fight. But if you're planning to go up against Negary, they'll be the first to stab you in the back. Of course, there might be some hidden talents here, but of the ones I know, only those two are worth mentioning." "That's enough," Augustine replied, his smile serene. "Those two will likely reach out to people they trust anyway." Together, they made their way toward a tavern, Jason Todd's usual haunt. It wasn't that Jason was a drunkard. In Rhea, taverns served more than ale. They were hubs for mercenary contracts, information, and shadowy negotiations. Jason Todd was once a simple man with humble dreams. He might have lived a quiet life working the docks, swinging a hammer as a carpenter, or forging steel as a blacksmith. But one pirate raid shattered that future. He escaped with his life, barely. When he returned home, he found his father beheaded, his mother butchered, and his younger siblings violated and left for dead. The pirates hadn't cared who or what they defiled. Jason, devastated but determined, chose vengeance. From a fellow survivor, he learned the identities of the culprits. Thus began his long pursuit. Over 7 years, he trained, hunted, and hardened into the cold figure he was now. Many of the pirates died in naval battles. The survivors scattered, changed their names, washed their blood-stained hands, and rebranded themselves as landowners or merchants. But Jason never forgot. He tracked them, tortured information out of one, and pressed on, always chasing the next name. Vengeance was all he had left. In the process, his sense of mercy died, replaced by cruelty and resolve. Yet even now, he held on to one principle. His word was sacred. A promise made was a promise kept. When Augustine stepped into the bustling tavern, his presence drew immediate attention. His pristine Church of Divine Grace robes commanded respect, or at least restraint. Those with ill intent chose to simply observe. Grosk pointed toward a man, silently eating alone. "That's Jason Todd." Seriously eating was perhaps the most fitting description. Jason consumed his food with the intensity of a soldier following orders. There was no pleasure, no taste, only duty. His stern expression didn't change, not even as he chewed. It was as if eating was merely fuel for the body, not a moment of indulgence. Clad in a black vest, silver-haired, his weapon leaned beside him, Jason exuded solitude. He was not a man people sat beside, nor approached lightly. "You make quite an impression," Augustine said, pulling out the chair opposite him and sitting down. "Need something?" Jason asked bluntly, not sparing a glance. "I have a difficult job for you." "I'll take it," Jason answered without hesitation. "You don't even know what it is yet. If you're not living under a rock, you'd know already," Jason said, swallowing the last bite of his food before meeting Augustine's gaze. "Didn't you notice how no one in this tavern greeted you? Then why accept it? One of my targets turned into a crowman. Even if you hadn't come to me, I would have found you myself. And don't bother trying to recruit Jack. I already asked. He took a job and left Rhea." "Understood," Augustine replied with a nod. Elsewhere, Chris watched as Nala quietly returned to her meal, a complicated look in his eyes. When he learned that respiratory art, it had taken him more than a full day just to grasp the basics. Nala, however, had absorbed the core principles in less than an afternoon. He hadn't taught her the advanced techniques. Those required personal comprehension. Once the fundamentals were understood, true mastery came from experience. The respiratory art was universal in principle but deeply personal in application. Each practitioner shaped it to their own rhythm. Noble lineages passed down secret techniques, refined over generations, that couldn't be learned simply by intuition. Chris had such a technique himself, though it wasn't something he could share with Nala. Not yet. Still, she was the saintress of salvation, foretold in prophecy. Now, at least, she had the means to protect herself. Chris exhaled deeply, only to stiffen slightly. "You've been eavesdropping for a while now. Care to share your thoughts?" he said, eyes fixed on a seemingly empty corner of the room. The air shimmered. From a distortion stepped a man in the uniform of the Roya's kingdom. He bowed respectfully. "So if that's the saintress of salvation, is it? Greetings, Sir Chris. Smick Landsher of the School of Light. Chris Modo of the School of Firewood," Chris replied, returning the formal greeting used by inheritors of the respiratory art. "Negary is growing far too dangerous. We need to work together," Chris said solemnly. "Agreed," Smick nodded. "The threat is no longer ignorable. Cooperation is necessary for the kingdom's sake." "And what about Nala?" Chris pressed. Smick's expression didn't falter. "The ancient covenant remains unchanged. One rhythm shall not extinguish another. I won't harm the girl, and you know it. That's why you taught her the respiratory art. Even with me nearby, isn't it?" He paused, then added with confidence, "Prophecy or not, under His Majesty's guidance, we will shape our own destiny. Even fate must bow before us." The King of Royas. Chris fell silent. When it came to nations, the concepts of justice and evil were rarely black and white. If the Royas kingdom were to declare war on the Intercam kingdom, the people of Intercam would undoubtedly see Royas as the villain. But could an entire kingdom truly be evil? Such judgments were far too simplistic. Good and evil, at their core, were subjective, constructed from societal norms and collective morality. Those who aligned with popular consensus were labeled as righteous. Those who did not were branded as wicked. It was all a matter of perspective, which is why, Chris thought, some matters were best not overanalyzed. Better to act according to one's own convictions than become lost in endless moral ambiguity. "I'll make no comment on King Eldridge," Chris eventually said, his tone reserved. Though he wouldn't publicly denounce a king, Chris personally leaned toward supporting Intercam. The Intercam kingdom was a diverse land, home to many races, while Royas remained rigidly Royas, a nation whose pride bordered on exclusion. The Great Robber, aka Alyssa incident, had only deepened that rift. Since then, many Royas citizens had come to believe in their own racial superiority, harboring open disdain for outsiders. And under King Eldridge, hailed as the greatest Royas monarch in 1,000 years, that pride had hardened into militaristic ambition. His reign was marked by expansionist zeal. While some might call it national growth, for civilians, it simply meant war, and war was always suffering. Chris didn't believe in condemning a nation wholesale, but when it came to the instigator of conflict, wariness was only natural. His quiet resistance came in the form of balance, doing nothing to assist Royas, and doing just enough to keep Intercam from collapse. Yet to King Eldridge, even this was irrelevant. In terms of sheer power, Eldridge was perhaps the only individual Chris knew who might stand on equal footing with Negary. The man's confidence bordered on madness. He believed even the God of the Church of Divine Grace stood beneath him. 13 years ago, just after Eldridge had ascended the throne, a cardinal from the church traveled to Royas, seeking royal permission to spread the church's teachings. At the time, many within Royas, including powerful nobles, had expressed interest in divine grace, whether from genuine faith or political convenience. Some even hoped the church might curb the Andrea royal family's dominance. But Eldridge silenced all dissent with brutal efficiency. He declared, "Even God is but one of my subjects," and proclaimed that the Royas people needed only worship their king. He expelled the cardinal, crushed the opposing nobility, and unified the nation under a singular vision: the glorification of Royas. Today, Royas stood mightier than ever. In contrast, the Intercam kingdom had weakened, plagued by the internal strife that came with Seth I's rise to power. Both kings had bloodied their hands in the name of reform. In fact, Intercam once had the upper hand militarily, but legitimacy made the difference. Eldridge had inherited his throne by right. Seth had seized his by favor. Seth's path to power had been paved by noble backing, and once he ascended, they became his greatest obstacle. Reform was smothered by political games. Over time, the once ambitious Seth fell into silence, unable to assert his rule. People now whispered of his reign as the sunset of the nation. Meanwhile, Eldridge basked in the praise of a generation. He was revered as a ruler among rulers. Young men across Royas pledged undying loyalty to him, proudly offering their lives. As an aristocrat of Royas, I fear Eldridge's reach, Smick admitted, eyes heavy with conflict. But as a citizen, I can't help but be proud. He straightened, voice firm again. Let's put an end to this topic. I won't harm the girl. I'll ensure my men hold off until Negary is dealt with. At this point, whether I stand here as a noble or a patriot, Negary is the true threat, Smick added. We'll strike at midnight, he continued. To avoid clashing with your side, we'll approach from the east of the Forbidden Zone. Any objections? Chris nodded. None. We'll attack from the south. The two men quickly exchanged tactical signals. Then, without another word, Smick's figure began to blur, his form flickering before disappearing entirely. Light inheritance, huh? Chris murmured. That particular technique was rare. Eldridge's control over Royas was absolute, and the very nobles who should have resisted his dictatorship were now his loyal soldiers. Smick's expression, filled with both awe and admiration, had made that very clear. But that was a matter for Seth I and the Church of Divine Grace to worry about. Chris's mind drifted to Nala, her bright, innocent eyes, and for a moment he hesitated. Did she truly have to carry the weight of prophecy on such small shoulders? Still, the battle awaited. Chris rose, briefed the others, and lay down to rest. Tonight, they would fight. On the opposite side, deep within Rheostromia, Yadley stood before his troops, finalizing the defense of the Forbidden Zone. His expression was complicated. He had no doubt that tonight's assault was coming. The enemy would move to strike at the Forbidden Zone. Their target, the Lord. And yet, the strangest part was, it was likely the Lord himself who orchestrated it. Yadley could guess at Negary's broader intentions, but not all of them. The true scope of the Lord's plans remained elusive, as ever. Still, he had his orders. Whatever Negary's game, Yadley's role was unchanged. Protect the Forbidden Zone, maintain the order of Rheostromia, and keep intruders from disturbing the Lord during his slumber. With our lives, we vow to protect Lord Negary, he roared to the crow men under his command. Within the zone, seated upon a throne made of bone, Negary sat unmoving, eyes closed. He seemed deep in thought. Then, as the last light of dusk faded and the black veil of night settled over the land, he opened his eyes. A wicked grin spread across his face.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
As midnight silently came, their forces finished assembling. No one knew for sure how many people would lose sleep over this, as tonight's battle would completely change Rheostromia no matter who was the victor. Either the master of Rhea, Negary, would clean up all other forces within the town and take complete control over it, or the joint forces of the two countries would defeat Negary and the dominant power in Rhea would change. Most people would think that the two countries were more likely to win, as they were representatives of their nations with their corresponding backings, while Negary had only risen to power for a bit over 10 years and didn't have a large history behind him like the two countries. But those who had known of Negary's greatness would only smirk and refuse to join the discussions. Indeed, in both a technical and practical standpoint, the joint forces of two countries would be more likely to win, but these people felt nothing but true fear in their hearts whenever they recalled that figure. the extreme, ominous feeling he gave off that made them feel like humans were nothing but walking food to him. Their natural sense of danger was madly warning each and every person who saw him the same thing. Danger, danger, danger. Lie down and play dead or run away as far as you can. Keep praying. Do not draw his attention, because he is something beyond human. The only way for them to feel at ease was to surrender themselves to him and offer their foreheads. You would then no longer feel any fear. You would no longer sense any unease because you already belong to him. Would a man who lived through hell be afraid of it? Chris looked up through the window at the sky above. Thick black clouds had completely blocked out the moonlight, giving off a faint, ominous feeling. But an arrow that had been pulled must be released, and if they didn't act tonight, Negary might have already recovered beyond their means the next time they meet. As he turned around, he saw the force that they had assembled. For the Church of Divine Grace, there was Cardinal Augustine, 2 priests, and 3 Knights of Divine Grace, a total of 6 men. Other than that, the merchant Grosk also brought 3 of his closest personal guards. And then, on the side that was hired for this job, Jason Todd, who came to take revenge for his family, as well as 4 others who all wore different gear and clothing. They claimed to have stayed in Rhea and wanted to fight against Negary for a long time, but didn't have the courage or power to stand out before. Of course, there's also a chance that there were spies among them. And then there was Chris himself. As the merchant Grosk and Isabella's mother-daughter pair weren't going to participate, there were a total of 15 people who were going to raid the Forbidden Zone and face Negary. The Roya's Kingdom side should have been able to assemble quite a few people as well. Realistically speaking, even if the wyvern that Chris killed were to be resurrected, this lineup would be able to kill it through sheer force. Now, there's one last problem. The crows Chris spoke with a heavy tone, the most common kind of bird in Rhea. All of them can be controlled by Negary, and when a flock of over 100 or 1,000 of them attacked at once, even an army of 100 men would be instantly defeated. If we cannot deal with the crows, our operation this time would be doomed to fail from the very start. Do not worry, Mr. Chris, Gross replied. Before we came here, we had ordered people to buy a large amount of smoker grass. It should already be burning as we speak. Smoker grass was a type of unique, dry-growing weed that most farmers purposefully grew, the main use of which was to be burnt during a harvest. When smoker grass burns, they release a large amount of smoke that lingers for a long time in the air. Humans can live just fine as long as they don't breathe in too much of this smoke, but birds were unable to survive if they breathed in even just a little bit. Farmers would usually burn this grass during a harvest to prevent pests from disturbing their crops. But now, they were being used as a measure against Negary's flock of crows. Sitting silently on his throne of bones, Negary reached his hand out. At this very moment, since some unknown point in time, a thick blanket of fog had gathered around him. The fog didn't seem to be causing any breathing problems, although the smell was a bit strange. However, from the panicked reactions of the crows behind him, it was easy to tell who caused this fog. Seems like I don't even have to hold back, Negary smirked and raised his hand upwards, like a jet-black cloud of feathers. His crows took flight high into the sky, on a high location away from the Forbidden Zone, a place that was set up specifically to gather information. As they heard the crows calling, they understood that the crows had left the Forbidden Zone and quickly sent someone to inform Brosk. Gentlemen, the crows have left the Forbidden Zone. We have bought up all the smoker grass around this area. This should be enough to last for 3 hours. Combined with how long the smoke lingers, you should have at least 6 hours to act, which is until dawn. I will bring Isabella and Nala to a safe location to hide, Grosk told them. May the Lord's grace shine upon you all. The group exchanged glances and walked out to the front yard. As soon as the enforcers stationed outside the house noticed the commotion, they hurriedly gathered with sharp spears in their hands. Chris Modo, you are violating the prohibition. Are you admitting to your crime of murdering Lord Comoros? Sorry, but we don't have time to waste here with a bunch of you, Chris sighed and immediately began to harmonize with the environment. His rhythm punch that came at them with indescribably strange angles made it, so that none of them could react in time or block properly no matter how much they tried. He easily knocked all of the enforcers out with a few punches. Although these enforcers were Negary's subordinates, they hadn't actually committed any heinous crimes that deserved death. There was no need to kill them. Let's go. The group scattered into smaller teams and separated, each making their way towards the south of the Forbidden Zone. The night sky was already cloudy, but now that there was even smoke in the air, visibility became incredibly low. They simply had no choice but to act at midnight like this because they didn't have righteousness on their side. As long as they won, they would be able to use the name of the church and the country to declare Negary as an evil mastermind and deal with the aftermath. There were quite a few smart people in Rhea who noticed the truth, but the majority of the people here were just normal people whose lives depended on this land. If this group had openly tried to fight Negary and disrupt the people's peace without a righteous reason, they would immediately face the so-called rage of the people. Compared to that, although their vision was affected by acting at night, their actions were not. The group remained silent as they quickly approached Rhea's Forbidden Zone. Patrol stations and tall fences had been set up around the perimeter of the Forbidden Zone, with groups of enforcers constantly patrolling around it. "Are we going to force our way in?" Augustine asked. When Chris was about to nod, a man with a bit of a limp who wore a metal mask and carried a set of bow and arrows stepped out, then told them in a low voice, "Follow me. We have a man inside who's going to open the door for us." Quickly, saying so, the man went ahead first towards a fence. Chris and Augustine exchanged glances, then Augustine nodded. The group quickly followed behind the metal masked man. After all, they were already prepared to charge and using force. Even the worst-case scenario wasn't going to be any worse. "So you still came after all." As one of the patrolling sentries at a secluded corner of the fence saw the metal masked man, he sighed. "He already ruined one of my sons. I won't let him ruin the other one as well," the metal masked man replied in a low voice. "Only this many people. I won't stop you if you want to suicide. Just don't tell anyone you saw me tonight." The sentry sighed helplessly and opened a small gate in the surrounding fence, then stepped over to one side. "Remember to close the door." "Let's go. Go and kill that devil who ruined my son." The metal masked man raised his torch, went through the door, and turned around to look back at Chris and the rest, giving off an air of extreme vicissitudes. "That is exactly our goal," Augustine replied in a low voice with an extremely somber tone. Chris said nothing else and went through the door. As he used his respiratory art, his body's rhythm harmonized with his environment to sense the surroundings. Chris' expression became stiff for a short moment before returning to normal. "What's the matter?" Augustine walked up to him and asked. "I'm fine. It's just that the rhythm in our surroundings is very ominous. Untold numbers of lies have been buried on this land," Chris replied in a heavy tone. By using rhythm to sense his surroundings, he felt like he was seeing lies being extinguished everywhere he looked. Indeed, thick miasma fills this place. A rune appeared on Augustine's forehead as he gave Chris a strange look. Through his grace of understanding, he could feel that Chris' words were a bit different from the truth, but he wasn't wrong. "Let's head to the target. We don't have much time." Chris didn't look at Augustine and simply continued. "Two people in each team maintain a certain distance with one another and move forward carefully. Use the signals to notify the rest if you find any enemy. I'll be the one moving by myself. Prepare your dragon powder. If we run into any bizarre scales, they're the only chance we have against them." The dragon powder Chris was talking about was one of the reinforcement goods supplied by the Intercam Kingdom. The bizarre scales have been found to be sensitive to things that carry a dragon's aura and show hesitation towards them. If the dragon's aura exerted was thick enough, the bizarre scales would even give up on attacking them. Otherwise, the bizarre scales' power and speed would be extremely terrifying to face. If the bizarre scales didn't have this weakness, they wouldn't have had the confidence to take the initiative like this. Although relics related to dragons were becoming rarer and rarer every day, the Intercam royal family itself had the dragon's bloodline. As the royal family takes pride in their dragon's bloodline, most aristocrats would collect one or more dragon-related relics to show their excellent tastes. This dragon powder was provided by Grosk, having ground up some dragon scales to obtain. Although the scales actually came from wyverns and not actual dragons, it was more than enough against the bizarre scales. "Be careful by yourself." Augustine didn't waste any time talking. He arranged the teams, as they had discussed beforehand, and advanced while keeping a certain distance. This was a plan to prevent being ambushed by the bizarre scales. When a group of too many people stand together, with their mobility and power, it would be extremely hard to avoid casualties. If possible, everyone here hoped that this would be one of the adventures in fairy tales where the heroes defeat the Demon King. They all manage to survive and have a happily ever after. But real life wasn't a fairy tale, and it would be hard for anyone to tell how many people within this group of 15 would remain after this ordeal, or if they would actually win at all. Within this dim, lightless place, various cages and abandoned houses could be seen littered all around, as if trying to tell a story of what this place was like 10 years ago. As Chris picked up a crow feather on the ground, he began to recall the intel he collected. When Negary first appeared, all he had were 2 messengers, which were 2 crows. After taking control of this Koshi village, the Koshi people formed a new hunting party that brought back crow after crow, slowly increasing the number of crows under Negary's control. By the spring of the following year, when a large number of crows began to lay more eggs and hatch them, the hunting party's job was changed to be responsible for hunting prey and bringing them back to the village as food for the crows. It was at this time that trading began in Rhea. At first, there were just a few merchants who came and traded food for the village's stock of animal hide and fur. Then it slowly turned into the gathering for smuggling trades between the 2 countries that it was known for today. It was around 7 years ago that this area was declared as a forbidden zone. At the time, the flock of crows had already grown considerably large. It would take over a dozen grown Koshi men an entire day's work to clean up the remains of the crows' daily food. When this place was turned into a forbidden zone, there was no longer a need for the remains to be cleaned up anymore. They were simply left on the spot after the crows were done with them, which was also why a few unfinished shallow holes could still be seen scattered from place to place. The only people who were allowed to enter this place other than the crowmen were the food transportation people. So aside from the frequently used road, all of the other locations were left to rot and degrade over time. The female priest, who was paired up with a knight of divine grace, was slowly walking along the silent small road. To ensure that the infiltration was successful, they had extinguished even their torches, so the pair had to rely on the female priest's grace of understanding to see where to walk. "Be careful. There are traces of living organisms here," the female priest spoke in a low voice. The grace of understanding of the Church of Divine Grace manifested as a rune on the user's forehead. Through this rune, the user gained a type of inhuman vision in which the world turned into a single color of gray. Only the essence of things would show up as color within this vision, giving those with this grace the ability to see through any fog, mist, and even darkness, as well as the ability to see things that normal people could not perceive. Those experienced with the grace of understanding could also develop it further to obtain more abilities. Like Augustine, who could tell a person's good or evil intention with his grace of understanding. As their thoughts crossed through their minds, it would show up as different colors for Augustine, which allowed him to determine friend from foe. That's why when the metal-masked man led the way, Chris turned to see Augustine's reaction, afraid that the metal-masked man was leading them into a trap. Only after having his confirmation did he lead everyone else inside. Understood, the Knight of Divine Grace's deep voice came from underneath his helmet. He drew his knight's sword halfway out of its scabbard while cautiously sensing his surroundings. The bag of dragon powder he hung on his wrist was swaying ever so slightly to scatter the smell of dragons around them and prevent any bizarre scales ambush. As long as they could delay it for even a brief moment, the other teams would quickly arrive to help. Of course, when the time comes, he would also need to sacrifice a few things, including his very life if necessary, to draw the attention of their enemies and allow the other teams to safely reach Negary. "Wait, be careful." The female priest seemed to have noticed something, but before she could finish her words, her blood had already splashed onto the knight's armor. The Knight of Divine Grace immediately drew his sword without hesitation and cautiously listened for the enemy, without making any noise. Under his helmet, some liquid was already flowing without him knowing. At this point, the raid team of 15 people only had 14 people left. This was a disgrace. Undoubtedly, as a knight of divine grace, he was tasked with the absolute protection of the priests supporting him from behind, yet it was that same priest's blood that splashed on his body while he was completely intact. That was disgraceful. Rivers held his knight's sword tightly in one hand and lightly touched the surface of his armor with the other. Feeling this well-worn armor of his that was wet with blood that still carried a bit of warmth, Rivers tried to calm his breathing down. The female priest's death was instant. She had been constantly using the grace of understanding. So even if the other party had a camouflage ability, they wouldn't have been able to escape her perception, which made the enemy's position quite something to think about. The problem now was that he didn't have the grace of understanding. Stuck in this darkness, he couldn't even find the way to advance, let alone discover where the enemy was and defeat them. With tears running down his cheek, Rivers thought for a few moments and lightly flicked his armor with his finger to create a tiny sound that was especially noticeable in this silent and dark environment. Shoo! As soon as he heard something, Rivers hurriedly ducked down as something flew past, almost grazed him, and was stuck on one of the abandoned buildings not too far away. So I guessed correctly, the enemy is using sound to determine my position. Rivers suppressed the sorrow in his heart and continued to think. It was a projectile, and the direction it came from was different. Her blood splashed all over me, which means that the shot must have come from directly behind me before, but this attack came from my side. The enemy changed positions, but I couldn't hear them at all. Shoo! The sound of projectile soaring through the air could be heard again. Rivers immediately became 120% wary, only to realize that attack wasn't directed towards him, because he clearly heard the sound of it sinking into flesh right after the shot was fired. The knight's body froze, since he wasn't attacked, and the enemy wasn't stupid enough to attack themselves. The target of that shot, just now, was very clear. Bastard, that damned bastard. They didn't even let a dead body rest. The enemy was attacking the female priest's body in order to force the knight into showing an opening. From a rational perspective, he had to endure it in order to win. He had to make sure not to make any sounds while searching for the enemy's position. But how could he do such a thing? She was his comrade. They fought alongside one another. They had mutual understanding and trust. She acted as his eyes, and he was her sword and shield. And now a hateful enemy was desecrating her body even after she was dead. How could he just endure it? Rivers' hand was gripping his sword so hard that it had turned white. When the sound of the next projectile appeared, the knight acted without hesitation. My lord's grace grants me the power to protect others. A bright white glow appeared around Rivers' body. It formed a barrier and allowed him to see for a brief moment. He finally saw a pale, white spear of bones with black threads wrapped around it soaring along the ground towards the fallen female priest's body. New yes. River put strength into his feet. He gripped his knight's sword tightly with both hands and cut the flying bone spear down. Almost immediately, he heard another shot and found another bone spear flying at him from a different direction. The knight hurriedly pulled his sword back, still clad in the grace of protection, and parried the second spear. As the glow of the grace of protection faded, River kept both hands on his sword and stood by his fallen comrade's body. He was no longer trying to hide his breathing, as there was no need to protect his comrade's body. His position was already completely exposed. The attack was close to the ground, so the one who attacked was lying down. Rivers had such a thought. The direction of the attacks were different, so I'm facing more than one enemy. The enemy needs time to prepare their attacks, because no follow-up attacks have come for a while even after I exposed my position. Rivers was constantly collecting information on his enemy for the sake of victory, waiting to avenge his fallen comrade. On the other side, the team closest to Rivers and the female priest was the team of Grosk's 2 personal guards. They clearly heard Rivers shout as he used his grace of protection, but they could not go help them even if they wanted to, because they were currently facing an even more dangerous enemy, the bizarre scales. These people injected with dragon's blood had completely lost their minds and became mindless, ferocious beasts due to long-time exposure to the dragon pressure within the dragon's blood inside their bodies. besides Negary, who found the method to restrain them. Only items that carried a dragon's smell or aura could make them hesitate just a bit. The merchant's personal guards were powerful warriors and were previously widely known mercenaries. They were both experienced veterans who Grosk trusted enough to rely on to protect his daily personal safety. He asked them to take on this job with the promise that regardless of whether or not they could return, there would be a great reward waiting for them. The reward that caused them to feel the most tempted was a recommendation into the Intercam Royal Knights Academy, where one had the chance to learn respiratory art. If they couldn't return alive, their family members would be reimbursed for their loss, and the quota to enter the Royal Knights Academy would also be transferred to their closest direct family members. That was the main reason why they agreed to join this operation. They first used their experience to determine where the bizarre scales was from the beast's mad rampage, then immediately used the dragon powder to avoid its ambush. One of them wielded his sword and kept cautious of their surroundings while the other took out two small spheres with rough surfaces and rubbed them together. As the sphere began to give off a bit of light and smoke, he threw them in opposite directions. The two spheres let out a small fizzling noise before bursting into unabating burning flames. The two spheres landed in their vicinity and provided them with illumination. The bizarre scale's golden scales were only seen for a very brief moment before it flashed and disappeared. The two men stood back to back and kept up their guards while constantly chewing something in their mouths. "Over there," one of them called out. The two of them acted instantly and rolled away in opposite directions. They both tossed a length of rope from their hips towards the other person, simultaneously crouched down close to the ground, extended one leg to brace themselves, grabbed the other's person rope and pulled it tightly. The bizarre scales figure abruptly appeared. Its scaly legs had been caught by the ropes. Both of the two men's bodies were pulled in just a little bit. The rough and thick lengths of ropes directly ripped through the layer of cloth they wrapped around their hands, as well as the skin underneath. But the results were certainly outstanding. The bizarre scales had tripped over and fell directly forward, both of its hands propped on the ground in front of itself. The leg that was caught in the ropes was already slightly twisted as the beast turned its ferocious face full of anger towards the two people. Ignoring the slight wounds on their palms, the men drew their weapons and directly charged at the bizarre scales. Without its terrifying speed, a bizarre scales was nothing more than a slightly uglier beast. Just as they charged forward, their bodies halted abruptly, as if they were caught on something. As they swung their swords to cut it down, one of them felt pain in his arms. The unknown thing then controlled his arm and shifted his swing off its course, directly slashing his companion's neck open. He then felt that something crawling deeper into his body and taking complete control of his arm. His arm then held the sword against his own neck. As his blood spilled, Yadley jumped down from a nearby tree, pulled the black thread out of the dead body, and absorbed it back into his finger. At this point, 3 people had died in the raid team of 15 people. Noticing something, Yadley quickly left the area and hid back into the darkness. So I was late. Chris arrived at the battle area from another direction. Unfortunately, the only thing waiting for him was 2 cold, dead bodies. The air was filled with the scent of blood and a strange smell of gunpowder. Chris sighed, glanced at the 2 burning balls of fire, then put his gaze towards the darkness behind it. The dark gold bizarre scales immediately leapt out from the shade of the tree. Due to the wound it received by tripping, the creature's speed was considerably slower. Chris easily avoided its attack, rolled next to one of the bodies, picked up a sword, and slashed the air, all within a single swift motion. As several black threads were cut, Yadley jumped out from the other side. The muscles of his arm blackened and morphed into a huge tentacle that whipped itself towards Chris. The bizarre scales also turned around and charged at him again. As the black tentacle struck his sword, Chris immediately let go of it and used the momentum to roll along the ground, at the same time avoiding the bizarre scales charge. Yadley's right hand that had turned into a tentacle directly struck the edge of the sword and received a small wound about the size of a finger. But small black threads came out from the opening of the wound and quickly sewed the wound back to normal. I used the black crow germs to devour and replace all the muscles of my arm. Due to the limit of the human body, one arm can only contain so many muscles, but Lord Negary's blessing has allowed me to surpass that limit. As Yadley's body trembled, a huge number of black substances began to gather at his arms, sprouting several tentacles from his shoulder. Each tentacle was made completely of black crow germs imitating muscles. The muscle tentacles madly writhed and struck his surroundings almost uncontrollably. The snapping sounds made by tentacles were an indication of how terrifying the force behind them was. Chris quickly stood back up, rubbing the numbness out of his wrist. The force of that tentacle hand was easily as strong as the wyvern. If a human body were to take that head-on, they would most likely snap in half. If I didn't already notice and purposefully let go of the sword, my arm would have already been broken. "You're already more monster than you are human," he commented as he saw Yadley sprout the jet-black muscle tentacles. In fact, right now he felt that the main body of the man called Yadley was actually the tentacles, while Yadley's human parts were more of a burden to him. "Bizarre Scales, charge. Kill him." Chris took a deep breath and began to move again. The Bizarre Scales lowered speed together with the dragon powder he was carrying made it so that the creature couldn't touch him unless he was careless. But that also meant that his range of movement had been restricted. Two of Yadley's tentacles propped themselves on the ground to support him, while the others wildly attacked their surroundings. The trees that stood in their ways were broken in half. The buildings that blocked them were smashed to rubble. Chris was actually feeling numb from the attacks through the intense shock waves they gave off. Against such violent tentacle attacks, as well as the Bizarre Scales' unpredictable ambushes, he had to spend all of his attention on dealing with these attacks without a moment of rest. Otherwise, if even one tentacle struck him, or if the Bizarre Scales managed to get on top of him, that would be his death. "Why are you still persisting? Give up." The Black Crow germs aren't like human muscles. They won't get tired or feel pain, but you will soon run out of stamina and fall. Yadley's body was basically being hung on top of the black tentacles right now. Since all the Black Crow germs that made up other parts of his body had been gathered to make the muscle tentacles, his body now looked incredibly malnourished. If he didn't have the two tentacles to prop himself up, he wouldn't be able to even stand up straight. It was also because of this that despite his tentacles practically going berserk, their speed and range weren't anything special. Otherwise, Chris wouldn't have been able to hold out for so long. "ABS. Give up your resistance, Chris. You can't even win against me, let alone Lord Negary." Yadley slowly declared it like the truth. "Look at your feet, Chris. You've already lost." Chris was shocked. He finally realized that the two tentacles that acted as Yadley's support had become considerably thinner. While a large network of black threads made of germs had already been weaved on the ground, with Chris inside it. The black threads pierced through Chris' pants and the skin of his leg, constantly spreading through his body from that opening. They restrained Chris' movements as the thick muscle tentacles attacked Chris directly. "You're the one who lost," Chris exhaled. "Deep rhythm." Yadley immediately felt a bit discomfort, but he didn't care. "Chris, your deep rhythm requires time to accumulate. But you've only managed to make contact with me during the short time that my threads pierced your body. At most, your deep rhythm can only make me feel a bit discomfort. Other than that, it won't do anything. So you still haven't noticed?" Chris used metal rhythm on his arms to block the coming tentacles. "You let the Black Crow consume so much of your body, then gathered them all to form these tentacles that by itself had already created an imbalance within your rhythm. Your current thin and feeble body is proof of that. Thanks to you being poisoned and your own body's rhythm being naturally unharmonious, my deep rhythm was nothing but a trigger." "Poisoned?" Yadley turned his eyes towards the two slowly burning balls of fire, as well as the remaining something that the two dead bodies had been chewing in their mouths. He immediately understood. "You're already losing your powers." Chris received the attack head-on, but due to the imbalance within Yadley's body, his tentacles had become considerably weaker and slower. "And my counterattack starts here." Rhythm-stripping punch. Chris threw punch after punch towards the basically stationary tentacles. His rhythm punch could attack an enemy's weak points without them reacting in time, while his stripping rhythm caused the body to produce an immense repelling force against the unharmonious substances within one's body. When combined together, each of Chris' punches had the ability to secretly send that repelling force into the enemy's body. The restraining black threads that pierced into his legs broke as he delivered punch after punch into Yadley, finishing with a punch straight into his chest. The repelling force acted directly on Yadley's heart, causing it to shatter and stop beating. As he found Yadley's life signs to slowly fade, Chris braced himself for the bizarre scales ambush. Although it seemed like he won very easily, he had already burned through most of his stamina. If Yadley had been able to prolong the battle just a bit more, he could have lost. He literally had no way to deal with the bizarre scales right now. The only thing he could hope for was that, without its master's command, the bizarre scales would not attack him, who had dragon powder on its own accord. After Yadley died, the bizarre scales became considerably more beastly. It stared intently at Yadley's corpse. It inched closer and closer to Yadley before letting out a roar, pounced on his corpse, opened its mouth full of fangs, and ripped open Yadley's throat without hesitation. A small skin pouch grafted into Yadley's neck was punctured, spilling out what seemed to be golden blood. Still keeping his eyes on the bizarre scales that was immersed in licking the golden blood away, Chris slowly backed off. He managed to defeat his opponent here, but he didn't know how the others were doing. While Chris was thinking that, a flash of light came out not too far away from where he was. Within this shroud of darkness, the light was particularly noticeable. That light, as he saw the blinding light coming from the other side, he ignored recovering his stamina or closing his wounds and hurriedly headed towards that direction. The bizarre scales was still madly drinking Yadley's blood flowing from his neck, but it suddenly became stiff. Several small black tentacles had already pierced into the bizarre scale's mouth from inside Yadley's neck. The muscle tentacles began to move and twisted the bizarre scale's neck. With its power, it easily snapped and severed the creature's head from its body. The last thing the creature saw was a man who was more of a monster than it was, piercing his black tentacles into its body and ripping out a still-beating heart out from its chest. The tentacles slowly pulled back into Yadley's body, constantly writhing and moving for a while until Yadley finally opened his eyes. That really was a close one. Yadley stood up. His new heart had already begun to work and pumped his own blood as well as the residue dragon's blood throughout his body. How troublesome. My body isn't suitable for implanting dragon's blood, so I could turn into a mindless bizarre scales at any time. Yadley was feeling a sense of fatigue unlike ever before. After working for so long, the black crow germs need to eat. Yadley glanced down at the corpse of the bizarre scales at his feet and put his right hand forward. It quickly morphed into black, writhing tentacles that pierced straight into it and devoured the body. Yadley was no longer concerned about being polluted by the dragon's blood. He had determined himself to go back to pursuing Chris and the others after replenishing his energy. Before he thoroughly became a bizarre scales, he intended to use his own life to stop their enemies. Enough. Return. Yadley, a voice abruptly resounded inside Yadley's mind, causing him to hurriedly prostrate himself. For Lord Negary, I regret nothing. Even if I have to use up the last drops of my blood, I will fight for your sake, my lord. Do you think you've done well? Negary's question caused Yadley's face to slowly become pale. Some of our enemies are already quite close to me. Negary was sitting on his throne of bones, speaking with an icy, emotionlessly cold tone. Do you know why it spread the fake information about my dormant period? This subordinate believes that it was to flush all of our hidden enemies out. Yadley hesitated briefly before answering. That is certainly one reason, but the other reason is that you and the others are gradually becoming unable to keep up with me. Negary's tone was still completely calm, but his words caused Yadley to feel a chill in his entire body. Just look at the weaknesses you showed in that battle just now. Arrogant, overconfident, and unwilling to grow. You have all basked in the power I gave you for far too long. You've become weak. Negary's words caused Yadley to completely collapse. Now that the very meaning of his life had been rejected, he no longer had any hope to live. However, Compared to the others, you are still good enough. Your actions of absorbing the dragon's blood have given me a few ideas. You are still useful. Return for now. I understand, Lord Negary. Yadley prostrated completely to the ground with tears running down his cheeks. He was feeling a mix of shame and determination. No matter what happened, he intended to do his very best from now on. He could not betray the last chance he was given this time and disappoint his lord any further. Let's rewind time a bit. At this point, the Knight of Divine Grace, Rivers, was currently standing guard by his comrade's dead body, ready to repel any sudden attacks. Can you hear the commotion on that side? A shameless mocking voice resounded from all around, making him unable to determine where it was coming from. Your other friends are dying as well, the voice excitedly said. Just like this woman, they were killed without being able to resist. Their bodies were pierced through, their blood spilled all over. The most precious thing to them, their very lives stripped away just like that. That's why the bunch of you are all so laughable. You could have all lived long, happy lives, but you decided to come here and die, then cling to the ridiculous notion that the bodies of the dead cannot be desecrated. That's not going to do anything but bring you one step closer to death. Silence, River shouted. As soon as he did, the sound of two projectiles ripping through the air could be heard at almost the same time. Protection! The glow from the grace of protection erupted, providing River's vision to see where the two bone javelins were coming from, but not in time to avoid or parry them. As he barely managed to knock one javelin away, the other pierced through his light of protection and stabbed into his chest. How resilient! Mr. Knight, the voice continued to mock him. But your resilience isn't going to do anything but cause you more torturous pain. You can't even find where I am. By my next attack, the only thing waiting for you will be death. Oh yes. Who said I couldn't find you? You foolish, dirty dirt-digging rat. Your attacks just now revealed exactly where you are. Rivers shouted in anger. My lord promised me the right of sacrifice for the ideals in my heart. I shall do whatever it takes. Rivers leapt into the air with an intense white glow all over his body. He held his knight's sword downwards and stabbed it straight into the mud and dirt beneath him, with the loud noises of numerous things snapping at once. The ground itself sunk down and revealed some of what was below. This was one of the large holes that was used to bury the remains of the crow's food from years ago. Inside it, innumerable bones were piled up with the surface covered in the sunken mud from before. The accumulated bones originally had gaps within them, which was further cleaned out later on. Several channels were dug out to connect them to different locations underground, where voices could also travel from different locations and created the illusion of voices coming from every direction. The reason why the underground voices could be heard from above was also because the bones transmitted them. This grace was called the rite of sacrifice. Those who obtained this grace could obtain the reinforcement of immense holy light and produce an attack of immense power. Naturally, the user would also have to pay a similarly immense price. In order to create the channels below the ground to allow movement, the piles of bone had been cleaned out to become hollow, so when Rivers attacked it with his sacrificial attack, it would naturally collapse. Rivers was currently lying in one of the holes inside the pile of bones. After using the rite of sacrifice, he could feel his life force quickly reaching its end. The crowman who was buried underground was still struggling to escape. If anyone else was buried alive like this, they could only wait for death, but he wasn't the same. He implanted his black crow germs into his bones so that they devoured and replaced his entire skeleton. When necessary, he could turn himself into a soft-bodied creature. There were two holes in his palms where he hollowed out the bones inside to turn his arms into bone javelin launchers that could fire any pole-shaped objects. He softened his body, gathered the black crow germs inside him towards the holes in his palm, and turned them into digging tools that allowed him to crawl his way up. That stupid knight, using such a powerful attack just to collapse on the ground waiting to die. I'm still the one who won in the end, the crowman thought as he pushed aside the dirt and emerged from the ground. Before he could even celebrate, he saw Chris and two other people standing right in front of him. At this point, After the Night of Divine Grace, Rivers used the rite of sacrifice, he was no longer able to fight. The raid team of 15 people now only had 11 people left. What's the situation? The one who asked this question was Grosk's last remaining personal guard. The one he paired up with was a Knight of Divine Grace. The guard was displaying a particularly heavy expression on his face. Obviously, he had already found out about the other two's deaths. I've used respiratory art to stabilize his rhythm. His life isn't in any danger anymore, but he requires immediate medical attention. Otherwise, he won't wake up again for the rest of his life. Chris stood up. River's body was currently being sat up against one of the abandoned buildings. Both eyes closed tightly as he fell unconscious. The rite of sacrifice took so much out of him that if Chris hadn't arrived in time to use respiratory art and help him ease the side effects, he would most likely be a corpse right now. On the other side, the Knight of Divine Grace already had his sword drawn, currently keeping watch over the captured crowmen. They intended to interrogate him for information, since every other crowman they had met were fanatics ready to throw their lives away for Negary. But this one was just sitting there obediently. When he noticed Chris looking at him, he even smiled brightly at him in return. "Can you let me go? I'll tell you everything you want to know. If you let me go, I swear I'll leave Rhea immediately and never show myself in front of you ever again." The crowman's body bowed incredibly low to show how pitiable he was and asked them with a humble tone, "Aren't all of Negary's crowmen supposed to be fierce and unafraid of death?" Chris asked curtly. Lord Negary chose the crowmen to compliment himself. Because of that, as long as one has a desirable characteristic, anyone can be chosen. The crowmen spoke with pride. "My fighting strength is comparatively lacking to the others, but my will to live is the strongest among everyone." Compliment himself? Chris scowled. "Tell me in detail everything you know about Negary, as well as everything about the other crowmen." I'll tell you right now." The crowman smiled amiably. He seems to have a sort of charm that made everyone who saw him slowly let go of their hostility, perhaps because his every movement was aimed to please you in a way that made you subconsciously want to forgive him. I don't know that much about Lord Negary either. It was pure coincidence that I was selected as a crowman. In fact, I haven't met Lord Negary directly too many times either, the crowman carefully explained. At the time, Lord Negary wasn't quite as eerie as he currently is. The feeling he gave off at the time was a sense of regality, like the bearing of a ruler that made one couldn't help but follow him. But as each enemy fell in his hands, as each crowman offered themselves to him, he gradually became more powerful and gradually more inhuman. In truth, unlike the others who wish for nothing but to throw themselves towards him, I want to get as far away from him as possible. Because whenever I stand near him, I always feel an immense impulse to dedicate my life to him. Because of that, I sincerely and honestly suggest that you leave right now, truly." The crowman looked at the three people with extremely sincere eyes, fearfully sincere. "Lord Negary, he has already surpassed the life forms known as humans. Everyone I meet him, he would guide and lead me to commit suicide and dedicate my will to live for him. At the same time, every time I manage to break out of his charm, I can feel the pure joy in his gaze, the gaze similar to that of a farmer who saw that his crops were growing healthily. Even now, a voice is constantly whispering in my head, telling to me kill myself and offer my everything to Lord Negary. Only then will I no longer have any troubles or feel fear. Do you understand it?" The crowman opened his eyes wide, showing a look of madness. His boneless body started to coil around itself and sprang forward like a serpent going for its prey. The crowman headed straight for the Knight of Divine Grace as two jet black-bone javelins appeared out of nowhere from the holes inside his palm. "For Lord Negary!" the crowman roared in his frenzy. When he recounted what he knew about Negary, he couldn't help but recall his figure and the scene in which Negary offered him his hand, and this time he couldn't endure the impulse. Since the Knight of Divine Grace already had his sword drawn to look out for any tricks this crowman might pull, when the crowman suddenly lunged at him, he instinctively slashed downward at him. Without bones to protect the inside of his body, the crowman's body was easily cut in half. The intense pain made him regain his senses as his tears, snot, and blood were mixed together. He desperately used what remained of his strength to crawl towards the direction of the Forbidden Zone's great tree. Lord Negary, I don't want to die yet. I still have room to grow further. Save me, Lord Negary. No, you're already ripe. A voice suddenly resounded in the Crowman's head. As you are right now, your will to live has become the strongest it will ever be. Lord Negary. The Crowman was still begging for his life up until the very last moment, but he couldn't escape death, and his life simply ended. The pitch-like, black crow germ slowly dripped down from his palm, seeped into the ground, and flowed towards Negary. This is... The three people there saw everything that took place in fright. A man who wished for nothing but to live, just by recalling Negary, had decided to make a suicidal attack right in front of their eyes. The shadow of the entity called Negary inside their hearts subconsciously grew bigger. Let me take this night back to be tended to. The personal guard lowered his head and said with a trembling voice, feeling extreme shame. He was truly frightful. At this point, he could already faintly feel the ominous air all over this operation. Volunteering to take Rivers back to be healed was nothing but a different kind of fleeing. You don't have to feel ashamed. Everyone else would feel the same. Chris smiled bitterly. After adventuring for so long, he had already seen all kinds of people, and after witnessing Negary's eerie terror with their own eyes, anyone would have made the same decision. To ask others to throw away their lives for the sake of their perceived justice isn't actually justice. That is only taking their morals hostage. Looking on as the guard carried Rivers away, Chris sighed. At this point, they only had 10 people left. Since they had eliminated 2 crowmen, not counting the bizarre scales that were running free from the lineup they showed earlier today, the other side still had at least 4 crowmen and 3 bizarre scales. Excellent. I wonder how the battle of the others and the people from Royas went. Let's go. We need to help the others as well. We can't afford to lose anyone else. And we're only a bit away from reaching Negary, Chris told the Knight of Divine Grace. The two of them quickly moved through the darkness and headed for the other groups. Sitting on top of his throne of bones, Negary currently had his chin resting on top of his hand and a joyful smile on his face. This smile was similar to those of farmers whose crops had grown big and strong just in time for their harvest. Suddenly, Negary lifted his head and looked forward. Someone was quickly moving forward on the path paved with bones. So you're finally here. Ha. A crowman who wore a black robe was running with everything he had on the piles of bones. He was breathing heavily as he ran, but didn't slow down for even a second. Obviously, he was trying to escape from something. Why are you here and not patrolling for enemies? Noah stood among the scattered bones, coldly glaring at this crowman. Sir Noah, the enemy is too powerful. Both John and the Bizarre Scales have been killed already. We couldn't hold out. Please take Lord Negary and escape. The crowman in question hurriedly answered. Has your mind rotted away while drowning in alcohol and women? Noah looked down at this crowman in disappointment. Another spoiled fruit, huh? Sir Noah, what do you want to do? The crowman cautiously observed Noah as his hair began to flutter like seaweed in water. Anya, you originally obtained the qualifications to become a crowman through your persistence and absolute tenacity. Noah's words caused the crowman's expression to change. Anya showed a complicated expression on his face, then gritted his teeth and spoke again. Now isn't the time to talk about these things. Those Royas people are going to arrive here soon. Taking Lord Negary and moving away is more important. So I was wrong. Your persistence and tenacity still haven't disappeared. But the thing that you persist on right now is extreme stupidity instead. Noah showed a mocking expression. What actually gave you the illusion that we needed to run away? You've truly grown to be irredeemably crooked and must be removed. I'll be the one to remove you first. Don't hinder me if you want to seek death. Hearing Noah's words, Anya abruptly shouted as his hair moved like living snakes towards Noah. This brat is Lord Negary's righteous, so he's a VIP. But he's still too young and his strength still hasn't matured. If I kill him and take Lord Negary to escape, The next righteous might be me instead. Anya had such a thought. He implanted the black crow germs into the skin on his head and turned all of his hair into black crow germs. This hair was extremely sturdy and resilient. If they coiled around an enemy, they would only squeeze tighter and tighter without letting go. At the very end, the hair would tighten all the way and cut through the enemy's bodies like 1,000 knives, granting them a painful and horrible death. Go to hell, obstructive brat! As Anya saw his hair coil around Noah, he shouted excitedly. Maximith! A golden flame suddenly erupted and lit the black crow hair on fire. As the hair was burnt to ash and scattered, Noah slowly walked out from within the fire completely unscathed. Maximith was the Koshi goddess of fire, although the shape she took in the myths and legends was that of a fire-breathing dragon. After the soul's blood was transplanted into his body, Noah's connection with the goddess of fire's name became stronger. So as he chanted her name, not only did his flames become stronger, the color also changed to become golden. No, that's impossible. The flames quickly followed Anya's hair back to his body and turned him into a golden human torch. The golden flames caused him searing pain, while Noah's strength caused him to despair. Your ability as a spirit shaman couldn't possibly be that strong. Anya roared in his unwillingness to accept the truth. Do you really think everyone is like you, only striving until they obtain strength and stagnating within it? Noah coldly stared at the burning man and spoke. You who have become stagnant don't even qualify to become a step on my Lord's stairs. Both you and your black crow germs can simply be purified by my flames, Nigerian IRS. Not too far away, the sound of brittle bones being stepped on could be heard as about 7 or 8 Roy's people in uniform arrived. Smick glanced at Anya, who was being burned to death, then looked straight at Noah, the unnaturally calm young man. What's this? You're killing one another. So you're prepared to surrender yourselves to us and become a subject of His Majesty, our King Eldridge? Smick purposefully asked such a thing. He was still only a young man. Just in case he couldn't take the provocation, he might unknowingly reveal some useful information. Senseless provocation. Noah retained his unchanging, emotionless expression, glanced at the group of Roya's soldiers, and slowly told them, Lord Negary is inviting you all to his abode to discuss a few things. So, do you really want to take refuge with Royas? Smick squinted his eyes to try and observe anything he could from Noah's expression, but wasn't able to read anything from it. If he had met this youth while he was at that age, he would probably have been heavily provoked by his demeanor. Please follow me. Noah turned around and walked as if he wasn't at all afraid of these Roya's people ambushing him from behind. Smick scowled. If he thought about this positively, this would signify that Negary was truly scared and wanted to form a ceasefire with them, which would be the best-case scenario. The Roya's troops would be able to take control of Rheostromia and turn it into a springboard to attack the Intercam kingdom. But from this youth's expression and gestures, he didn't seem like someone who was about to surrender. Furthermore, through the heightened senses of his respiratory art, he could clearly sense the ominous feeling that Negary was giving off. Even if he didn't want to, he had to admit that level of rhythm was already comparable to King Eldridge's own. Additionally, from the information that they collected, he knew that Negary was still progressively becoming stronger and more terrifying as time passed. So Smick silently had a thought. Even if the other party intends to call for a ceasefire, I need to find an opportunity to suppress Negary's spirit and make sure that he can't keep improving. Follow him. Be careful of traps, Smick shortly reminded his troops before following Noah. Ominous, dangerous, eerily, and inhumanly charming. These are the first impressions that crossed Smick's mind as soon as he saw Negary sitting on his throne of bones. Ah, you must be the soldiers of the Roya's kingdom. Quite fine indeed. Negary opened his eyes, glanced below at the group of Roya's black ops, and slowly commented. That tone, that glance, all of it caused Smick to shiver uncontrollably. He felt as if Negary was a diner sitting at the food table who was looking down at them and praising, "Oh my, this piece of steak is quite decent, very supple." This gave Smick an illusion of being a piece of food. No, that wasn't an illusion at all. The countless bones he saw around this place consisted of many species, but the most numerous were those of humans. As a soldier of the Roya's kingdom, Smick had killed more people than a normal person would meet in their entire lives. Even if this was his duty as a soldier, and there was no such thing as right and wrong in a war, he would still occasionally feel guilt and unease about his actions. But when he faced this entity, Smick could feel it from the depths of his heart. The other party was truly thinking of them, of these living and breathing people as his food. There wasn't a single hint of apologetic sentiment or discomfort in his gaze, because to him this was an obvious fact. Negary, Smick spoke with a loud and solemn tone. As a member of the Lansher family, the heir of the School of Light, a soldier of the Roya's kingdom, and above all a human, I demand your immediate surrender, or what awaits you will be nothing but death. Hack, hack, hack. What a bold and shocking statement that as Negary was sitting still on his throne with his face resting on his hand, grinned joyfully at Smick's words and replied, "Then come at me, humans." When Negary said humans, his tones sounded the same as when people would say bread, causing the soldiers of Royas to feel a chill run down their spines. Attack! Smick gave the order as his body became blurry and disappeared from sight. Several other people drew their knights' swords and advanced towards Negary in a formation. On the Roya soldiers' uniforms, they had a belt that had various vials around the size of the thumb that carried all sorts of liquid inside. The Roya soldiers skillfully pulled the vial with a red flowing liquid, threw it to the air, and accurately slashed it with their knight swords. The red liquid inside the vial flowed out and soaked the blade of their swords, forming a layer of eerie blood-colored fire that also gave off an ominous feeling. This power, Negary squinted his eyes as he observed the red flames. According to the information he had collected through the years, there were only two main types of supernatural powers in the Roya's kingdom. The first was the respiratory art that was held by the aristocrats, while the other was hailed as the country's ultimate weapons, the ancestral spirit armors. From historical records, there were only about a dozen of these armors in the entirety of the Roya's kingdom. They were mostly normal armors that could be worn, but the key lies in the ancestral spirit part of the name. These so-called ancestral spirits were the past heroes of the Roya's kingdom. As they become close to death of old age, they would perform a ritual, using their lives as a sacrifice to turn themselves into the existence called ancestral spirits. The craftsmen of the Roya's kingdom would then attach these ancestral spirits into a piece of armor. From then on, as long as a person is recognized by the ancestral spirit, they would be able to don the armor and obtain reinforcement from the ancestral spirit inside. Each warrior who donned an ancestral spirit armor were powerhouses on the battlefield that could rival 100 soldiers by themselves. When he found out about the existence of ancestral spirits, Negary was extremely intrigued. As far as he knew currently, after a human died, the true spirit that represented their origin would leave this world and leave behind the derived product that is the soul. The remaining souls would mostly scatter by themselves and become a cluster of soul essence that contained their emotions before death, as well as a part of their memories. If the corpse was mostly intact, and if the soul was strong enough, they might become a remnant soul instead. Newborn remnant souls are completely mindless. They simply lingered by their corpses and absorbed the life essence from the body to maintain their form. When life essence ran out and there wasn't any replenishment, the remnant soul would be exposed to the environment and be scattered into soul essence. In his past life, Negary once heard a certain joke. Someone had said that he wasn't afraid of ghosts, because he would also become a ghost if he was killed by one. How awkward would that be? But in truth, after Negary killed someone, over half of their life essence would be absorbed by him. And if the remaining soul can't even absorb their own life essence, they can't even become a ghost, let alone a remnant soul. Furthermore, even if they could, a newborn, mindless remnant soul that only just awoke a random power would be nothing but food for a remnant soul that already had time to grow. Other than that, Negary had never seen a soul left behind by a dead life form take any other forms. He did try to keep a true spirit behind after a life was extinguished, but unfortunately, he had no way to control or restrain a true spirit. since the Roya's kingdom's ancestral spirit ritual seemed to be able to affect the true spirit. Negary had been interested in learning about it. But what he was witnessing the Roya's soldiers use was a completely new kind of power. The information Negary obtained did mention that after Eldridge united all the forces within his country, he gathered excellent craftsmen and witches to try and create something. So this is the product of Eldridge's creation. Negary detached one of his finger bones, letting it float before flicking it away. The finger bone was turned into a streak of white light that directly struck one of the soldiers' swords. The sword was knocked away by the force of the finger bone. It then ricocheted off of it and directly hit the middle of the man's forehead. And oh yes, the soldier's body collapsed directly on top of the path of bones. The wound on his forehead didn't bleed, but rather started burning with that eerie red flame. The flame quickly spread until the entire body was engulfed in it. From the body, the flame rose again and again, apparently trying to manifest as something, but because of some reason, it couldn't succeed. The burning knight's sword also fell on top of the bones, but strangely, the bones didn't react to it at all. The flames only flickered briefly before it went completely out. The others didn't stop their advance just because of their comrade's death. They all raised their swords burning with a strange fire as they quickly closed in on Negary and swung their swords at him from different directions. How foolishly courageous Negary sat still on his throne of bones and didn't bother to move much. He only swung his hand forward, and countless bones on the ground immediately shot up like a barrage of projectiles towards the soldiers, forcing them to take evasive maneuvers. One of the bones that were shot out was a spine. As it flew by one of the soldiers' heads, it acted like it suddenly came to life and coiled around the Roya's soldier's neck, squeezing tightly. The man became flustered as he tried to pull the spine away with one hand while he held his sword with the other, but it was to no avail. Negary continued to control the bones around him, to shoot at the soldiers, to force them away, while his finger coiled inward and pulled the soldier with the bone coiled around his neck towards Negary. Several other spines emerged from the ground and coiled around his limbs, completely restraining him no matter how hard he struggled. It only looks like fire, but actually isn't. Negary mused and gestured with his hand, controlling this soldier through the spines to hold his own sword against himself. As the burning red flames approached the soldier's body, something could faintly be seen moving beneath his skin. When the flames directly touched him, the thing beneath his skin exploded outward. They were his veins. The veins caught fire and burned with blood-red flames that broke through his skin, but instead of blood, he was bleeding the same kind of fire. Flames that only burn blood? It seems even going into contact indirectly with this flame would cause it to be ignited. Negary continued to analyze the flames as he manipulated the man to touch another place on his body with his sword. And another fire erupted. Negary was quite intrigued by this red flame. And from what these soldiers had shown, within the Roya's kingdom, the technology behind this power had grown to be quite developed. Eldridge would most likely be quite the delectable fruit Negary had such a thought as he raised his hand upwards. A cutlass that abruptly appeared out of nowhere was caught on its downward swing. Did you think I couldn't see you, a human? With a flick of his finger, Smick's body was forcefully expelled from his camouflage and sent flying backwards. Do you still intend to resist? Negary spoke with a light tone as he stood up from his throne, yet his voice carried an air that didn't permit rejection. Kneel, gentlemen. Hearing Negary's words, the soldiers' bodies couldn't help themselves acting as he directed them to. Their legs bowed as if they were ready to kneel. It was as if they had another self inside their minds that was controlling their movements. This was one of the abilities that Negary created in the past few years. He called it the words of domination. Throughout these years, Negary had absorbed so much soul essence that he understood the human mind better than any human. He had a perfect understanding of what psychological reactions a human would have in each and every possible situation. Because of that, from the very moment he saw these people, each of Negary's gestures and movements had been aimed to put invisible psychological pressure on them. At the same time, these soldiers had been breathing the germ-infested air since a while ago, taking in a large number of germs into their bodies, germs that had a connection to Negary. When enough of his germs were inside a person's body, Negary could directly speak into their mind. While these people had nowhere near that much inside their bodies, there was still enough for Negary to transmit his will through them. Through environmental pressure, verbal manipulation, and suggestions, as well as the germs inside their bodies constantly whispering Negary's will into their minds, the weak mental barriers of human mind would quickly be broken through by Negary. And once that happened, that person would become a puppet for Negary to control as he pleased. Because of that, Negary named this trick Words of Domination. Negary suddenly scowled. The Roya's soldiers that were originally struggling against his words of domination suddenly stood back up straight. Their legs were no longer wobbly or unstable. With flaming swords in their hands, these soldiers angrily roared. They took out another vial from the belt on their hip that contained a flowing golden liquid and crushed it with their bare hands. The broken shards of the bottle pierced through their palms, allowing their blood to flow and mix with the golden liquid. Negary could see it clearly that when they roared, each of them had a missing tooth and instantly understood how they escaped his domination. One of their teeth had been modified to contain some sort of serum, most likely a stimulant that caused their mental state to enter a hyperactive state and escape from the control of the words of domination. Then what effect does the golden serum have? Negary looked at the Roya's soldiers in interest. He wasn't in any hurry to kill them, because if he did, all he would get is a bunch of mediocre emotions. Only by constantly giving them a glimmer of hope and keeping it there could he induce these people to exert all of their potentials and automatically adjust their soul's state to its peak. Only then would their souls become especially delectable. After all, the times had changed. In the beginning, Negary was concerned with his survival, so he wasn't picky with his food. But now, since he had more than enough food to spare, he naturally became a gourmand who only ate food that was more delectable and could help him improve himself one step at a time. Right now, he wasn't fighting these soldiers at all. He was only cooking and molding their souls to be as delicious as possible. As the Roya's soldiers' blood mixed with the golden liquid, the liquid seemed to have been activated as it quickly grew and slid into the soldiers' wounds like an actual living being. One could see with the naked eye that something was moving underneath their skin, almost as if an army of tiny creatures had invaded their entire bodies. Thanks to the serum they drank from their tooth, their sense of pain had lessened greatly, so this sensation was only at a level of discomfort. Very quickly, the bodies of these soldiers grew one size larger. The muscles on their bodies became inflated and started to give off a golden glow. The blood-red flames on their knight swords also seemed to have sensed this and began to coil around them, turning the soldiers into golden juggernauts burning with red flames. So they could be combined as well. Negary could sense the germs inside their bodies quickly dying in droves. Obviously, after taking in that golden liquid, their body's immune systems had become considerably stronger, and the limited number of germs that infected them so far obviously couldn't fight back. It seems the thing Eldridge obtained was quite impressive. It wasn't as though there aren't any obviously supernatural items in this low magic world, but they're all extremely rare, either strictly kept within a closed circle or only a little bit of it remained. Ngoi, from what was seen from the Roya soldiers so far, this supernatural power that came from consuming different kinds of serums had been thoroughly grasped and researched. Not only was the usage streamlined, but it could also be mass-produced to an extent. To be able to mass-produce supernatural serums in a low magic world, he obviously must have obtained something quite great. Naturally, this type of supernatural power must have quite the strict usage time and severe side effects. Negary analyzed what he saw. Otherwise, these people wouldn't need to wait until now to start using them. Furthermore, there's a bit of something similar to dragon's blood inside these serums. It seems to be an incomplete. Will Negary observe these Roya soldiers and notice that ever since they used the golden serum, their mental state had been constantly shifting back and forth. I see. They did not use the stimulant serum to escape from my words of domination, or at least not purposefully. Their main goal was to not be affected by the will inside the golden serum after using it. Could it be The main ingredient for these serums was a type of supernatural creature. Negary had this speculation as he controlled the bones around to hover and shoot towards the soldiers again. This telekinesis-like ability was naturally the interference force of Negary's soul, but it wasn't as though it actually grew this strong. The main reason why he could utilize this level of strength was that these bones were completely filled with his germs. By using his interference force on the germs that he controlled, the power he could exert through these germs was incredibly massive. However, this time, when faced with these bone projectiles, the Roya's soldiers didn't try to avoid them. After the blood-red flames coiled around these golden juggernauts, their properties had somehow changed. As the bone projectiles got close, they began to melt and were already turned into a white goop by the time they reached the soldiers' bodies. The goop was then melted into white mist and disappeared. The 5 human-shaped flames then charged at Negary with great momentum that made it seem like they couldn't be stopped. Finally, "You at least seem like you're worth the effort." Negary finally stood up from his throne and faced the 5 approaching Roya soldiers with a bit of anticipation in his mind. Ever since the Crowmen were formed, Rhea's enemies had always been dealt with by the Crowmen. Even if someone managed to break through the Crowmen's encirclement and sneak into the Forbidden Zone, they were still so weak that he could easily wipe them out. Now that Negary thought about it, it should be a bit over 3 years since the last time he properly took actions. The Crowmen were gradually unable to keep up with him, so this time he actually got a chance to fight, and the enemies seemed decent enough for him to use a bit of his true power. Glancing at the approaching Roya's soldiers, Negary clenched his fist tightly and joyfully chuckled. Those flames only caused blood to burn in the beginning, but after attaching themselves to the golden juggernauts, they changed somehow. Negary was analyzing the situation. In a battle, as long as it was not a complete curb stomp, any intel about an enemy's abilities was crucial. "Let's test it out." Then Negary clenched his fist and threw a single punch at one of the Roya soldiers rushing at him. Yadley managed to obtain superhuman strength through replacing a large part of his body with the Black Crow germs, but Negary's current body was completely made up of germs. The power and speed Negary could display with his imitation muscles were so great that the Roya soldier couldn't even react as the fist pierced through his chest all the way to his back. The Roya soldier's expression did not change at all. Under the effects of the stimulant and the golden serum, his mental state had reached a state of false apotheosis. He was currently not afraid of death for the sake of his beliefs. The man used the rest of his strength to grip Negary's arm tightly and ensured their mutual deaths. "You will fall right here. The last god's flames will burn through you and turn you to ash." Even with a hole in his body, the only thing that poured out was the blood-red flames and not fresh blood. "So this fire is called the last god's flames?" Negary looked at his quickly melting right arm without any agitation or fluster, only pure curiosity. As the flames were about to reach his shoulder, Negary's arm suddenly broke off by itself to reveal a cleanly cut opening, from which an infant's arm of black muscles covered in a slimy liquid suddenly sprouted. The arm quickly expanded like a balloon to an adult person's size, at which point white mucus seeped out to form a new layer of skin. I already have a general grasp on how fast and strongly this fire can burn. Negary moved his newly grown arm a bit, as something seemed to be gathering from the air around him. Displaying his pale white, growing nails, Negary declared, "Which means you can die now." While Negary's words were still echoing in the air, his body had already appeared behind a Roya soldier. One of his pale white nails pierced into the muscle-bound, flaming body like a rapier. It seemed as if he didn't have to put any strength into it at all, but when they regained their senses, all of their bodies had already been diced into pieces. Negary's slowly melting fingernails then detached from his finger by themselves. During the time that the fire burned his right arm, just now, Negary had used the various germs in his body to try and resist it, thus figuring out that the metal-eating germs that formed his bones were the most resistant to this kind of flames. If he had continued to experiment a bit more, Negary would have been able to composite a different material out of germs that had a higher resistance to this fire, but that was now unnecessary. After using the 2 serums, these people's beliefs and confidence had already peaked, so there was no need for him to waste any more time. With some condiment, these ones will serve as quite a decent appetizer. Negary turned around and glanced at Smick. Then, have you prepared yourself, Mr. First Main Dish? As an evil spirit, you must have been a human at one point. Smick looked at Negary in fear. Although he already knew that Negary would be very strong, he didn't expect him to be so frighteningly strong. They couldn't fight back at all. In an instant, the last god squad that he was in charge of was completely wiped out. Whether it was physique, fighting techniques, or battle instincts, Negary could be considered one of the best in this world. To become one that dominated over others, fighting was definitely inevitable, so there was no way Negary would forget to improve this aspect for himself. Rhea had many frequent mercenaries, some of whom were excellent fighters in their own rights, and all of them had, at different points in time, taken up a job to teach a certain VIP of Rhea how to fight. Perhaps they weren't quite on the same level as the legendary adventurer Chris, or underwent formal methodical training like Smick, but as wandering mercenaries who did this dangerous job for a living, they more or less had skills of their own. Being taught by several dozens of these teachers, Negary absorbed their battle experience, their skills, and even their battle instincts. Even without his terrifying physical prowess, he could still be considered one of the strongest combatants among humans. But with his viral body and all sorts of unique abilities, he had far surpassed the limits of the species known as humans. He held an overwhelming advantage in every aspect over any human, so it wasn't strange for these drugged Roya soldiers to be easily killed by him. So what if I was? Should I worry about whether or not my actions conform to the norm of society, then feel condemned by my inner morality? Negary smiled without care. Compared to what I pursue, they are nothing but unimportant, needless baggage. I want to dominate everything and everyone, not be dominated by those boring baggage. The only thing I need to obey is my own thoughts. After absorbing the soul essence of the Roya soldiers and learning what he needed, Negary turned to Smick and spoke. A normal person is always weighed down by their so-called conscience. This is nothing but the product of an artificial common morals created through living in a society. Whenever one does something that doesn't conform with common morals, one would feel pressured by their conscience and becomes hesitant. You are the same, Smick. Negary spoke. You are hesitant because of the common benefits of the nobles versus your loyalty for Eldridge. You don't know whether you should support Eldridge, who can bring benefit to the Roya's kingdom as a whole, or support the benefit of nobles from which you were born. However, Smick, the things that are causing you to feel hesitant are nothing but useless baggage. Negary offered his hand towards Smick. Try it. Smick, push open that gate of virtues. Discard those useless things and surrender yourself to me. You shall find that you have obtained permanent peace of mind. Smick was trembling. He can't help but admit that he was feeling tempted. He was wavering. His faith and belief were currently unable to resist Negary's invitation. It was true. Everyone in this world was locked inside a large prison cell of their own making, restrained by all manners of chains and restrictions. And it was also true that, deep down inside, everyone was eager to push away these chains and escape to obtain the pleasure of being free of their morals. Right at this moment, this pleasure was tempting him. Smick Lancher looked at the military uniform he was wearing, then at the Lancher family crest on his chest. He then took a deep breath and once again showed a determined look in his eyes. Negary, the things you call useless might be constantly weighing me down and causing me trouble, but they're also what created and formed the human known as Smick Lancher. I'm not a monster like you, and I will not discard what makes me me. Aralfi, you made the correct choice, Smick. Negary praised him. Only your current self is qualified to become the first dish tonight. Although my willpower has become solidified to the point that it would not change even after 100 or 1,000 years, I still fully believe that my willpower is nowhere near enough to become the dominator of all things. Your character of persisting to your own beliefs, no matter how much you're tempted, is truly the thing I require most. Negary looked at Smick and grinned. As a reward of my praise to you, I shall suppress my physical prowess and limit myself to only the limit of what a human can possess. I shall also not use my telekinesis abilities, if you can truly win against me, I will let you go. I might even consider cooperating with your king." "Stop your lies." Smick was obviously standing far away, but his voice came from right next to Negary. "So you haven't learned your lesson yet?" Negary's right hand morphed. The metal-eating germs gathered at his wrist to form a pale white blade that blocked an invisible weapon. Negary suddenly tilted his head as a wound abruptly appeared on his face. The black germs underneath could be seen writhing as some white mist scattered to the air, but naturally, this wound was quickly healed. "You managed to discover me thanks to the things floating in the air, didn't you?" Smick's voice came. "They exist everywhere, so even if I conceal myself, you can use their positions in the air to determine where I am and even my movements. But I've already seen through this little trick of yours, Negary." Smick quickly retreated and revealed his figure again. At the same time, numerous more Smicks appeared out of nowhere. "School of Light, light illusions." Through channeling the rhythm of light, he created illusions of himself everywhere. At the same time, it wasn't as though the light couldn't deal any damage. While these light illusions appeared to be human, they would appear as bright miniature suns within one's perception. The rhythm of the light quickly burned all the germs that got close to the illusions. This way, you won't be able to tell which one of me is real. 10 Smick stood at different locations and spoke at once. His voice also seemed to have undergone some sort of special alteration, as one couldn't use it to tell where it was coming from at all. "How impressive," Smick Negary praised. "Now, let me force you to exert more of your potential and bring out more taste in your soul." Negary put his hand up as he walked towards the group of Smicks. He was actually keeping his promise and suppressed his body to the limit of humans. Although he was still unimaginably fast, it was no longer so fast that one couldn't react to it. The 10 Smicks advanced all at once. These illusions were very realistic, to the point that Negary couldn't tell who the real one was. The real Smick was among them, so one wrong move could cause him to be hit. As the first Smick charged straight at Negary and swung his cutlass at him, Negary raised his arm sword to block, but that Smick simply passed right through, revealing it to be an illusion. Taking advantage of when Negary raised his arm, the other Smicks all raised their cutlasses and attacked from different directions. Parrying one strike meant he couldn't parry another, and if he happened to choose the incorrect one, the real Smick would be able to attack the defenseless Negary. But almost immediately, all 5 of Negary's left fingers exploded and turned into a liquid that accurately shot towards each Smick's head. All the liquids passed through without trouble, confirming that all these Smicks were illusions. "So careful," Negary commented, almost sighing. He already thought of this method of finding the real one as soon as he saw the illusions. If the real Smick was actually among those illusions just now, Negary would have landed a critical attack and taken his life without hesitation. Smick didn't answer him. His 10 illusions quickly shuffled among one another, occasionally even overlapping and changing directions abruptly, obscuring the real one among the fake, then attacked from different directions in groups of 2. Before confirming which was the real one, he had to treat it as if he really was fighting against 10 Smicks at once. A blade also grew from Negary's left wrist, allowing him to parry with both hands at once. Any Smick that got close to him would be slashed first before they did anything. As the illusion's attacks became more rapid and concentrated, Negary appeared to be occupied with defending. His blade slashed at another Smick. After confirming that the blade passed through him without trouble, Negary pulled his hand back to attack another illusion. But this illusion continued to attack Negary with its cutlass. If one could pay close attention, they would notice that there was an overlap on this cutlass. When Smick believed that he was about to win, Negary's body abruptly shifted, completely ignored all the illusions, blocked the cutlass with his left arm while his right hand thrust forward without hesitation. At the very last moment, Smick noticed something was wrong and immediately adjusted his rhythm without hesitation, causing his body to shift its momentum and jumped backwards, half crouching down and clutched the side of his hip. There was a wound about a fingertip deep there. Seeing the blood on his blade, Negary shook his head. If Smick had reacted a bit slower, the blade at his wrist would have pierced through his heart and not his hip. Smick glanced at the white bones beneath his feet, swung his cutlass, and cut a piece of bone apart to see a piece of black flesh inside. Your illusions seem very real, but a fake is still only a fake. Among them, you were the only one that had actual weight. Negary smirked and explained. And so, I gathered a large number of germs inside the bones, making it so that even your light rhythm couldn't kill them all right away. When you stepped on them, the germs shifted and revealed your location. Naturally, there was something else that Negary didn't explain to Smick. Smick's school of light was completely useless against his field of perception. A simple change in light couldn't fool the field of perception, which meant that from the very start, Smick already had no chance of winning against Negary. He was purposefully orchestrating to the situation to make his opponent feel like that they could win if they tried just a little bit harder to trigger them into unleashing more potential. But in truth, Negary had always been in control of how the battle went. He already held both sides' trump cards tightly in his hands. It was because he had this absolute advantage that Negary did something like purposefully triggering his opponent's potential and hold so much of his strength back. There was no such thing as a Protagonist Aura. Here, under the suppression of this world's misfortune attribute, the only thing that one could rely on was pure power and wit. So, Smick, go on. Unleash more of your potential. I'm looking forward to it quite a bit, Negary grinned. Or you can give up right here and surrender yourself to me. Smick continued to breathe and adjust his own rhythm, looked up at Negary, then stood up and prepared to fight once again. He wasn't willing to lose himself, so he chose to continue to fight. It was this determination and persistence that caused Negary to grin even more joy. Are we late? A hoarse, half-coughing voice called out and stopped Smick from continuing his attack. Chris' group of 10 finally managed to make it here. As Chris glanced at the bones and dead bodies around, he sighed, then placed his gaze on Negary. Before seeing Negary, all Chris could sense from Negary was an extremely ominous rhythm. But after looking directly at Negary, Chris could only draw a single conclusion. This kind of entity should not exist in this world. Evil spirits are the errors that shouldn't exist in this world. They're the natural-born enemies of humans. Because of that, evil spirits must be eliminated. Augustine's gaze became stern. He had already participated in an evil spirit subjugation before, so he knew how dangerous an evil spirit was. Each growing evil spirit was a calamity, a disaster. Their very existence required the lives of countless others to be maintained, just like the Intercam capital's mist demon, the green plague that once wiped out a certain town, the ocean disaster on the eastern seaport. And the thing that alarmed Augustine, as well as the majority of the Church of Divine Grace's upper echelons, was that evil spirits were showing up a lot more frequently. This caused them to consider the possibility of the calamity prophesied in the Divine Grace Bible, especially when a sentient evil spirit like Negary had appeared. Within the records of the Church of Divine Grace, the Koshi people used to be the most powerful human race, uniting and ruling over the entire continent as the gigantic empire of Trilancia. And the main reason why this powerful empire fell to ruin over 200 years ago was due to the appearance of a certain sentient evil spirit within Trilancia. That evil spirit had the ability to control the hearts of people. He instigated internal strife within the Trilancia Empire and caused this vast empire to slowly head to its ruin. Evil spirits are the source of chaos. They're the results of errors. Their appearance itself leads to bigger calamities. Because of this, evil spirits must be purified. This was the Church of Divine Grace's common principle. So the main dishes already can't wait to join in, huh? Negary's gaze swept through these people. The same gaze that seemed like he was looking at food caused them all to feel a chill down their spine. Then go ahead and come at me at once. I don't mind a difference in number. The results would be the same in the end. After all, the majority of you have a reason to fight and win against me. Negary was smiling as he said this, pointing specifically at Jason Todd. You must be the one called Jason. You came to Rhea to find Cadi's Mareg, didn't you? Negary's words caused Jason's emotions to immediately flare up. He would never forget the horror that befell his family that day when his everything had been taken away, The only thing left that kept him going was the singular will to find and make the culprit behind everything pay the price. So that bastard really is here? Jason spoke with a clearly provoked tone of voice. After the group of pirates who killed his family disbanded and went their separate ways, this was the first concrete clue he found of them in 7 years. It isn't him alone. After Cadi's Mareg came to me, he also called his old friends to join him. Negary confirmed it. All of your enemies are currently under my command. If you want to take revenge, then use everything you have to defeat me, Negary declared temptingly. Negary then turned towards the metal masked man among them. Before Camaros passed, he asked Noah to tell you his apology, but since Noah was busy with my matters, he really didn't have time to do so. As his lord, let me pass it on to you instead. As soon as he said this, the metal masked man's hands that were clutching his bow and arrow trembled restlessly. He was a father, and the thing that caused a father the most anger was seeing any of his children's lives being ruined, let alone both of them. Negary didn't care much for the metal masked man's anger, or perhaps the angrier he became, the happier he would feel. At certain points, anger was also a kind of power. It was quite unfortunate that I couldn't devour the Church of Divine Grace's buccal soul. Hopefully, the rest of you would be similarly delectable with just a few words. He riled the anger of all the priests and knights of divine grace. And you, Chris Negary finally placed his gaze on this legendary adventurer. If you don't want your secret to come into light, then risk everything you have and fight in. Believe me, news travels easily, and they travel fast from Rhea to other parts of the continent. If you lose, all of that person's and your efforts up to this point will have been nothing but wasted. Negary's words caused Chris' pupils to contract. He didn't ask how Negary noticed or found out his secret. That was no longer important. The only thing he needed to do now was to triumph over Negary. Stop your chit-chat, and let's do this. Jason's eyes were burning with the flames of anger as he raised his bow and aimed at Negary. Chris, the Knight of Divine Grace Meyerson, as well as another Knight of Divine Grace, all charged at Negary at once. The two knights immediately used their grace of protection to protect themselves while their swords were clad in the grace of justice, swearing to cut this devil down with their swords. Jason, the metal-masked man, as well as a cooperator who joined the raid party for his own reasons, raised their bows and unleashed a barrage of attacks to interfere with Negary's actions. Augustine and his disciple, Windonner, both used their grace of understanding to watch out for Negary's tricks and occasionally used the grace of salvation to dispel some of the germs that filled the air. Smick once again concealed his figure and waited for a chance to unleash a fatal strike. The other masked combatants who joined them from Rhea decided to slack off at this point. These people were sent out from their respective forces who came from outside Rhea. They participated in this battle in order to earn as many benefits as possible. As far as they were concerned, the more intense Negary's battle with the others was, the better it was for them. They only needed to make sure to protect their own safety. Being ganged up on by this lineup, Negary was constantly swinging the blades on his wrists. The swords of the Knights of Divine Grace were reinforced by their grace of justice, allowing them to remain intact. Chris was a lot calmer than they were, only throwing the occasional punch while he mainly observed the situation. If you don't intend to fight, you can die first. Negary's gaze suddenly stared straight at the two masked fighters at the back who were slacking off. He ignored everyone else's attacks and swung both arms forward. The two blades attached to his wrist suddenly detached themselves and pierced through those two's bodies. My lord grants me the grace of justice, so that I shall cut down the darkness. The Knight of Divine Grace didn't waste this chance and slashed straight at Negary's neck with his reinforced sword. Under the effect of the grace of justice, the sword cut through him like a hot knife through butter and decapitated Negary's head. But as soon as he finished his strike, he noticed that the sensation wasn't quite right. The cut on Negary's neck revealed the inside to be completely empty, while the head that was cut off abruptly exploded and splattered liquids of various colors all over. Negary's headless body split apart by itself to reveal a smaller, younger-looking Negary inside, covered with white liquid, who slashed upward with his hand. The nails at the tip of fingers were razor-sharp, immediately broke through the knight's grace of protection from below, pierced into the knight's neck and lifted his head off his neck. As blood splattered all over, the younger-looking Negary tossed the severed head of the knight of divine grace into the air, through the fog created by the smoker grass into the flock of crows above. One Negary declared joyfully. For him, the two fighters who didn't have any intention of fighting he killed earlier didn't count. When his previous head exploded, what it scattered were acute germs. Once infected, a person would feel sick almost immediately, symptoms being dizziness, sluggish limbs, sudden shortness of breath, and various others. However, Meyerson had the grace of protection, so those germs were blocked out by the white barrier around him, while Chris managed to avoid them thanks to his heightened senses when using respiratory art. Several arrows quickly came flying, but Negary lightly swatted them away with his arm. The outer shell that he just shed turned into a black liquid that quickly moved and attached itself onto the body of the headless knight of divine grace. Soon enough, a black headless knight stood back up and charged towards Meyerson. Meyerson was completely shocked and couldn't do anything but defend himself against the corpse of his previous comrade. This was another corpse manipulation skill he created, a different and more advanced form of what he did to make the dead speak for him. A human body naturally contained many reflexes and instinctive movements, and if they practiced something frequently enough, it would form muscle memory. Negary manipulated the germs to cover the knight of divine grace's body and used their feelers to pierce through his corpse, constantly mimicking muscle stimulations to make the body move according to muscle memory. The headless knight that was fighting against Meyerson was using the same swordsmanship taught in the Divine Grace's night school, causing Meyerson to feel as if he was fighting against his comrade, thus unable to fight with his full strength. You are desecrating the body of the dead. Negary, you truly are a devil that needs to be eradicated. Augustine furiously shouted. What desecrating the dead? It's nothing but some boring spices. But if it can make you humans exert even more of your potential, then even boring things have their value, Negary spoke with an excited tone. Give me everything you've got, humans. Otherwise, more of you shall die as time passes. Come. Let this battle be a bit more interesting. Negary's figure swiftly charged towards Chris. The germs in the air were constantly funneling towards Negary to make his figure grow and expand. There are completely no openings within his rhythm. Chris gritted his teeth. A normal person's rhythm usually followed their own natural patterns, which would include their own weaknesses. Chris' rhythm punch took advantage of the weaknesses within that rhythm to attack. For example, if a person's dominant hand was their right hand, in an unexpected situation, they would subconsciously use their right hand, which made the areas where their right hand can't reach the weakness within their rhythm. Rhythm punch took advantage of that to only attack such awkward positions. But despite Chris having closely observed Negary's rhythm, he couldn't find the weakness within his rhythm at all. Regardless of where he attacked, Negary would still be able to easily deflect it. Not enough, not nearly enough. Negary's hand pierced straight toward Chris. As he was about to parry it, Chris noticed in shock that Negary's fingers had begun to shrink. The tip of his finger was now pulled back to where the middle part was. With an almost intelligible noise, his 5 fingertips detached from his hand, each flying at high speed with razor-sharp nails on top of them. Chris barely managed to avoid them by tilting his head, but his expression suddenly became warped. Immediately behind where Chris stood, the metal masked man who was about to fire his arrow fell backwards. On the forehead portion of his mask, a bony black finger was sticking out with blood dripping down from it. This father's wrath still wasn't able to save his sons to the very end. He couldn't even save himself. Jason breathed heavily as he rolled on top of the bones on the ground. Some of his silver-white hair was still fluttering down from above. If he hadn't been maintaining vigilance, he would have had his head pierced through as well. Are you okay? The other remaining archer, who was also a masked fighter who volunteered to join them in Rhea, approached Jason and offered a hand to help him stand up. Jason was about to accept his help, but suddenly felt a sense of danger. The masked fighter abruptly smiled cruelly, drew his short sword and thrust it straight at Jason's stomach. My lord had all of us learned temperance. Forbid all acts of evil. Augustine's voice resounded. Some sort of power had acted on the masked fighter and made it so that his short sword couldn't move any further. Jason then reacted, grabbed the hand of the masked fighter, pulled him down, and used the momentum to stand back up, kicked the masked fighter's stomach, and threw him over his shoulder straight into the pile of bones below. The masked fighter immediately coughed up blood. Jason was renowned because of his cruel methods. So with those two exchanges just now, the masked fighter was already close to death. His skin gradually turned black, then melted away into black liquid, revealing him to be the Chroman Garnet. Arbates. Useless to the very end, I had hoped he would be able to at least achieve something. Negary spoke with an unchanged expression on his face as his fingertips gradually grew back. If the grace of temperance could restrict an enemy's movement, why haven't you tried it on me? Negary shifted his body, moved away from Chris, and approached Lwen Donner. Lwen hurriedly retreated. If it was possible, he really wanted to use the grace of temperance on Negary. But the grace of temperance could only restrict actions that carried ill will, and there was a layer of something around Negary's body that completely blocked out his will. As Negary reached his hand out towards Lwen, he felt a crushing sense of death clutching his throat, greatly hindering his breathing. He was the eldest son of the Donner family. Having received an elite education since birth, he joined the Church of Divine Grace, relied on his own efforts and achievements to become Cardinal Augustine's disciple, solidifying his position as a future high-ranking member of the church. He still didn't want to die. He still wanted to become a high-ranking member of the church, or perhaps even the Pope. He wanted the church to grow and develop even more under his guidance, spreading the teachings of his Lord far and wide. Even with his hopes and grand vision, when he faced Negary, he felt his entire body stiffen from fear, unable to move even a finger. Negary had already devoured the soul essence of too many humans to count. So whenever he concentrated his attention on a single person, they would feel the immense pressure of Negary's will. Lwen was an excellent man and a genius in his own right, but he was still too young. My Lord's greatness spreads all over the lands, granting the courage to face all opposition. Augustine once again used another grace, the grace of courage. This power could be used to reinforce other people and allow them to resist mental-type powers. Lwen finally regained his senses and quickly moved away. Chris also managed to catch up, took a deep breath, and used Silent Punch to attack Negary. On the other side, as Meyerson saw how badly the situation was becoming, he muttered sorry under his breath and raised his sword. The glow of the grace of justice became bright as he sliced the headless knight's body part. Seeing his comrade's disfigured, tattered body, a sense of guilt panged Meyerson's mind. Suppressing this guilt, he charged towards Negary again, but his fighting spirit was clearly dwindling. Still too weak, Negary stood casually on top of the bone-filled grounds. Even now, he was still suppressing his strength, yet these people were unable to make him feel pressured at all. There were only 6 people left to face him right now. The legendary adventurer, Chris Modo, the Cardinal of Divine Grace, Augustine, the Cardinal's disciple, Lwen Donner, the Knight of Divine Grace, Meyerson, the Roya's Last God Squad Captain, Smick Landshire, and the Avenger, Jason Todd. All 6 of these individuals had their own desirable personality characteristics and could be considered elites among humans, although Lwen and Meyerson were still a bit green. Your determinations are still far from enough, Negary commented. These people could be considered the top among the humans of this world. According to the intel he had gathered, the only one who could be above them was the man called Eldridge who ruled over Royas. If the top is merely this much, then my journey would not reach far Negary's side. After so many years of growth, he could already sense that barrier, the unbreakable obstacle. In the end, this was only a low magic world. Then let me raise the stakes a bit, Negary slowly declared. You must have already noticed, in Rheostromia, most diseases do not exist. The reason for that is because most causes of these diseases are perfectly controlled in my hands. Every year, the merchants who came to Rhea and stayed for a certain period of time would take with them some of Rhea's specialty. That is my blessing, Negary spoke with complete seriousness. Normally, these blessings stay dormant and are completely harmless to humans. In fact, they make it so that they are always healthy. But once I order them to become active again, they will regain their true forms as diseases and infect their hosts. The merchants who wander this continent will become moving progenitors of diseases and spread the plague wherever they go. And there are currently 6 of you left. For each one of you that cannot satisfy my needs, I shall activate the germs within 10 of these merchants. Trust me, this is more than enough to create a plague of disastrous proportions. Although this will cause my sources of food to dwindle greatly, that is perfectly fine. It is a trade-off that I can make. But what about you? Are you prepared to pay that price? As Negary spoke, his glance fell onto Meyerson, the Knight of Divine Grace. Perhaps it was because he had just destroyed his comrade's body, but he remained especially silent. Naturally, there's an option for you all to surrender yourselves to me and help me take control over more territory, Negary smiled. It was under my guidance that Rhea grew to the prosperity it has today. Those who live here would not be troubled by the majority of diseases, and the only thing they have to pay is a few sacrifices. Think about it. Compared to the number of people who die from plagues and diseases each year, the sacrifices that I demand are significantly lower. Negary tempted them. Your very choice of attacking me was already the wrong decision. Spare us your deception. Chris was stunned for a while and remained silent until he spoke up again. It is unfortunate that so many people die from diseases, but sacrificing people is surely nothing but wicked. Using good results to justify wicked acts might look good, but I wholeheartedly believe that this is nothing but an error, and I will never accept an error as anything else but that. If you disagree with it so much, then exert more of your potential and show me your determination. Negary laughed and pulled his gaze away from Meyerson. He knew that the young man had already fallen into his trap without any hope of escape. By taking Negary's words into consideration by itself, it would seem to make sense. By paying a significantly smaller price, they could eliminate the big problem of most diseases. But at the same time, Negary's own influence would grow greatly. Perhaps most diseases would indeed be eliminated, but it would be at the cost of more disadvantages. But Meyerson wasn't Chris, and he hadn't been through nearly as much as the adventurer. Furthermore, the deep impression left from his childhood of the poor people of the slums being tortured by their diseases, in addition to the grievance of having to kill his comrade's corpse, created a hole inside his mind. He suddenly felt that their actions of going against Negary itself was wrong. If you feel something is wrong, go and make it right yourself. Child, a voice seemed to be coming from inside his mind, causing Meyerson to blink in confusion. Just look, you were forced to fight a tough battle against the corpse alone, but the Cardinal never extended a helping hand. Yet as soon as Lewin was in danger, Augustine managed to help him with time to spare. This is the difference between a peasant and a noble. It was because of his birth that Lewin could become Cardinal Augustine's disciple. While no matter how hard I work, I would never be able to achieve my dreams. Until now, when I see a different path. Perhaps to other people, this path is an error, but to me, this is nothing but correct. Such thoughts were sprouting nonstop in Meyerson's mind. Although his status as a poor-born peasant made Meyerson's personality a bit deeper than others, no one could deny that he was a decent youth who wanted nothing but to do good things. Unfortunately, the one he faced was Negary. Under the constant mental guidance of Negary's will, what was originally some meaningless emotions were infinitely magnified and turned into the last straw that overwhelmed Meyerson's heart. As Meyerson raised his sword to use his grace, he felt that all of his grace had become dim without a single light. The corner of his lips raised up to form a self-deprecating smile. So even the Lord had given up on me. Meyerson, what are you thinking about? Hurry. Lewin was breathing heavily as he endured a headache and forcefully used his grace of salvation to purify the surrounding germs again. As the eldest son of the Donner family, the future heir of a noble family, as well as a possible future high-ranking member of the church, he was frightened by an evil spirit to the point of being unable to move. This shame could only be made up by defeating it. Glancing at Lewin, Meyerson raised his knight's sword, and the germs in the air slowly gathered towards Meyerson. Augustine had been constantly using his grace of understanding and suddenly felt a clear, ominous feeling encroaching his mind. Truthfully, this feeling had already faintly existed since a while ago, but Negary's presence was so overwhelming that this feeling was interfered with and drowned out. It was only now that Augustine could clearly tell where this ominous feeling was coming from. As he turned around, he immediately saw Meyerson gradually turning black as he raised his sword towards Llewellyn's neck. Meyerson's gaze appeared to be hesitant, but more germs were constantly being poured into his body, magnifying Negary's will and causing Meyerson to become fallen even further. At the same time, due to using his grace too much, Llewellyn's mind was a bit sluggish, unable to notice the danger coming from behind. Grace of Temperance. Augustine used the grace of temperance again to restrain Meyerson's actions, then felt pain coming from his chest. A hand had pierced through and was holding his still beating heart. Too much concern leads to mistakes, so you only amount to this much in the end. Cardinal Augustine Negary appeared disappointed. Although his faith was firm, he was still only human, and he had weaknesses. Our Nigerian Irio, my lord, sacrifice. Augustine spoke those words with great difficulty before he erupted in a blinding white light. As Augustine's lifeless body fell on the pile of bones below, the body of Negary, who was standing behind him, had already been burnt to a crisp, almost like charcoal. Is he dead? Jason kept his bow raised at the charred body. Unlikely, Chris suppressed his feelings of grief and answered with a solemn tone. From seeing Bucadal's final words, he knew that Negary's body was formed from many layers, and despite how powerful Augustine's rite of sacrifice was, the most it could do was probably kill Negary just once. Cracks slowly formed around the charred body and broke apart. A piece of writhing black flesh fell out and landed on the bone-filled ground. It then immediately leapt towards Augustine's corpse and jumped into his body from the hole on his chest, essentially replacing the heart that had been ripped out. Black tentacles began to stretch from the black pieces of flesh and quickly filled Augustine's body to form a complicated black pattern right underneath his skin. As Augustine's body staggered and stood up, his originally pristine white skin was now filled with shiny, black tattoo-like patterns. I really can't underestimate any of you, Augustine, or perhaps Negary, once again opened his mouth to speak. He didn't seem too angry about his body being destroyed. On the contrary, he was actually feeling quite glad instead. Negary, without your body, you're no longer impossibly powerful. Your defeat is imminent. Chris took a deep breath with a solemn look in his eyes. You were too arrogant. As Chris made his solemn declaration, he was already charging straight at Negary and swung his silent punch towards Negary's chest. Chris, you can't defeat me. Do you really think I've been doing nothing but wasting time fighting all of you for so long? Negary grinned. Whether it was against Smick or against you, I've been doing my best to hold myself back while fighting. Even Augustine's rite of sacrifice was something I half-purposefully received. Negary's breathing began to change. His existence itself began to harmonize with his surroundings. A large number of germs within the air began to gather towards Negary and fully covered Augustine's body. All of that was for your respiratory art. Negary joyfully laughed. My control over germs had already reached its limit a long time ago, and your respiratory art, that works by harmonizing with the natural rhythm, was exactly the key I needed to break through this limit. After learning it through your battles, I found that my viral body couldn't perform this technique no matter how much I tried. Apparently, the respiratory art had a secret limitation that made it so only humans could perform it. As more germs gathered around Negary's body, his physique slowly grew larger, but that is no longer relevant. When the environment surrounding me is nothing but my germs, my breathing can harmonize with their rhythm over 100 times more than you humans ever possibly could. I am the perfect life form. This rhythm. Chris was shocked. Just as Negary had said, there was a limit to how much a human could use respiratory art to harmonize with their environment. Even a genius could only harmonize their rhythm to a certain degree, as this was the limit of being human. For this reason, most respiratory art practitioners placed emphasis on how to utilize their rhythm, but Negary was different. Negary replaced breathing with his ability to control germs and the environment with the germs he controlled, allowing him to harmonize with his surrounding rhythm over 100 times more than a human could ever achieve. He could easily sense more of the rhythm around himself, and by utilizing this rhythm that exceeded a human by 100 times, he could perform any tricks or techniques that other practitioners could over 100 times better. When Negary's body had grown to become over 3 meters tall from the germs that gathered around his body, several tentacles sprouted behind his body, thoroughly solidifying his image as a giant naked monster. He raised his hand towards Chris. I believe you call this trick absorption rhythm, correct? An immense suction power suddenly manifested and acted on Chris' body. He staggered, unable to resist being pulled towards Negary's hand. Normally, absorption rhythm could only be used to make objects within a certain distance stick close to the practitioner's body without falling off. But as Negary's current body was harmonized with his environment by over 100 times, the suction power had also been increased to be over 100 times stronger. Chris couldn't resist it at all. Negary, the practitioners of respiratory art, all follow a certain ancient covenant. A rhythm cannot extinguish another rhythm. Now that you're also a respiratory art practitioner, you also mustn't go against this covenant. Chris declared this as he was caught in Negary's hand. Aryenjio, do you honestly believe that I would follow such a laughable restriction? Negary mocked. Then I have no other choice, Chris muttered in a low voice. Although I already knew that this day would come sooner or later, I still can't help but feel emotional doing this. Now, become a part of me, Chris, or should I say, Sakri. Negary pointed out Chris' secret. During the Snow Mountain escort all those years ago, the real Chris did not actually survive. Even though he had respiratory art, he was still only human. On that Snow Mountain, the two of them faced the pursuing troops and defeated them. But Chris was also heavily wounded. Being stranded on the Snow Mountain without proper medical aid, he could only succumb to his death. Sakri could still remember clearly the last words that Chris left him as he clutched his hands. This world needs hope. Sakri, I have something to ask of you. Chris was already incredibly weak, but he spoke with resolve in his eyes. This continent will soon be plunged into darkness, and everyone needs the fire called hope within that darkness. Sakri, replace me and become a legend. You will become the fire of hope for both yourself and others. Afterwards, Sakri brought Chris memento tokens with him out of the Snow Mountain. He compiled the old stories Chris told him in the Snow Mountain into the now-famous novel, then ruined his own face to replace and become Chris. Year after year, especially during the last few years, Sakri had fully embraced and became Chris the undefeated legend, encouraging countless people to choose the path of an adventurer. Like how he originally inspired the Crowmen Nosades, he had indeed become a symbol of hope for many. The name of Chris will become an eternal faith, and I have no regrets. Recalling the last card he had up his sleeves, Chris' scar-filled face displayed a terrible, yet also beautiful grin. School of Firewood, ultimate secret art. Firewood links the fire. Chris' rhythm surged forward and forcefully invaded Negary's body, attempting to change his rhythm. The wills and thoughts of all School of Firewood practitioners in history were also infused into Negary. Besides their respiratory art skills and techniques, there were also their beliefs of justice, hope, and glory that tried to alter Negary's personality. The School of Firewood only had this single secret art, the main use of which was to allow an inheritor to quickly learn all the skills and techniques of respiratory art and increase their rhythm to its limit in an instant. Back on the Snow Mountain, it was because he had accepted this secret art that the Bard Sakri could become and replace Chris so quickly. You think these boring notions and thoughts can change my thoughts, human? Negary endured the mental interference of these thoughts and angrily declared, Light's secret art, streaming blade of light. A cutlass pierced into Negary's body and accurately hit the black blob of flesh within his chest, then unleashed intense light and heat. Smick's figure appeared for a split second before applying the elementary usage of the School of Light to apply optical camouflage on his body. The School of Light. ultimate secret art. Streaming Blade of Light was done through harmonizing oneself infinitely close to the rhythm of light while erasing one's human rhythms for a split second. Through doing this, the practitioner would turn into light itself and travel to a predetermined destination with the light and perform their attack. This state of harmonizing oneself infinitely close to the rhythm of light could only be kept up for a split second because otherwise the human body would shatter. Naturally, as long as the predetermined destination wasn't wrongly selected, this attack essentially would not miss. Since Chris used his ultimate secret art to restrain Negary, Smick's attack naturally didn't miss. The outer layer of germs didn't contribute at all as defense. His cutlass accurately pierced through everything and into that black blob of flesh in the middle. When the cutlass pierced through the blob of flesh, some sort of liquid spewed from the wound all over his hand. On closer inspection, he found that it was golden-colored blood that naturally drew Smick's eyes as if they were the most precious treasure in the world. Soaked with the golden blood, his cutlass seemed almost alive. Smick had a distinct feeling as he held the cutlass that he would be able to easily kill anybody as long as he had it. Chris fell to the ground and looked as if he had aged several dozen years at once. His life quickly reached its end without even the time or strength for him to move his head. A small bit of life essence surged forward from his dead body. The firewood links the fire technique couldn't be performed without paying the ultimate price. Chris' soul also came out together with his life essence. The long years of adventuring made it so that his mental fortitude far exceeded those of normal people. Even as a remnant soul, he still managed to retain a bit of his rationality. An abnormal guiding force then appeared on Chris' remnant soul. Am I being guided to heaven? Chris had such a faint thought as his soul flew away from the battlefield, through the piles of bones around, and finally landed in the hand of a certain person. The corner of Noah's mouth raised to reveal a pleased smile. It seems I found a leader for my Ghostmen soldiers. A few moments later, Chris felt a surge of intense emotions rush into his remnant soul. These emotions directly struck his psyche without giving him even a moment of rest. These emotions were mostly negative, consisting of hatred, unwillingness, despair, as well as a heavy sense of fear and obedience towards that person. Negary, Chris screamed out in despair, but after a long while, he added two more words, "My lord." Noah looked down at the subservient Chris in his hand and recalled what he had spoken with Lord Negary beforehand. Did you know Noah? At the time, Negary still hadn't gone inside his viral body, or perhaps he was never in there in the first place. He was hovering by the great tree and looked down at the bones that littered this place. Humans are an exceedingly fascinating species. They naturally have a fixed mindset about certain things and find it extremely hard to think outside of this loop chain of thoughts. Negary slowly spoke. They choose to ignore certain things and believe only what they think to be the truth. I was also once stuck in this vicious cycle, but why would I limit myself to the mere human form? Negary declared with a smile. Even when I have yet to reach my limit, I am one, and I am thousands. This wasn't a world like those in the novels, but rather one that had the misfortune characteristic, the situation where the heroes arrived in the exact final moments when the Demon King was about to complete his evolution would not happen. And Negary wasn't foolish enough to wait for them to arrive. In fact, even before Chris' raid team even made it into the Forbidden Zone, Negary had already completed his evolution. Newbie, his soul could be said to be formed from the parts of countless others. But this was originally his choice, so there was no reason for him to limit himself to only a single soul or even the form of a single human soul in the first place. This was the true meaning of the soul's blood. Dragon's blood had a total of 3 abilities: improve the host's physical constitution, carry the inheritance information, and dragon's pressure, as well as an indivisible mutual connection. The soul's blood also perfectly replicated these 3 functions. It modified the host's physical constitution, carried Negary within it, and formed an indivisible mutual connection with each other. Since Noah implanted himself with the soul's blood, Negary became a different side of him through the soul's blood, That was why Noah declared that he had become one with his Lord, and this relationship would continue through his bloodline inheritance. If Noah had an offspring, his offspring would be born with the soul's blood in their body. As his offspring grew up, and their true spirit slowly derived itself to form a soul, the soul's blood would continually awaken and infect the newly born soul with the soul virus called Negary. Even without being taken over by Negary, a secondary personality would still form and become hidden within his bloodline. In summary, Negary had evolved from being a single soul to being a soul virus that attached and grew from a bloodline. As he infected more people, he would similarly grow to become more massive. As for the Negary that Chris and Smick killed, that could also be considered to be a part of Negary. Negary had been absorbing the emotions that he wanted from the humans who died, but there were simply too few who volunteered to become his sacrifice or dedicate themselves to him. The majority of those he absorbed so far were fighting moments before their deaths. Even if Negary had been careful only to take the emotions he wanted, he couldn't help but absorb a lot of fighting spirit from them as well, causing him to seek battles. Because of this, he put a part of this fighting spirit together with the emotions that he didn't need into a viral body, binding them together with soul's blood. In fact, Negary should be thanking Chris and the rest for helping him eliminate a part of him that he didn't want, while also helping the spread of his soul's blood. Cadiz Mareg, Connor Kenway Noah, or perhaps Negary, lightly spoke. The huge pile of bones behind him moved as a fat man that seemed to be around 4 to 5 meters tall stood up from within it, together with a man who carried a long spear on his shoulder. Both of them were wearing pitch-black armor with a helmet that obscured their faces. They prostrated in front of Negary and spoke with fanaticism in their voices. "The Ghostman greets our Lord Negary. It's your turn to take the stage. Clean them up. No need to use your full strength. If they can run, let them." After Negary gave his orders, the aura of a being that had surpassed humans gradually faded away, leaving behind the perfect, righteous Noah. A long black spear came flying from afar and smashed through a skull on the ground. The ghost man who carried the spear jumped down from the fat man and showed himself in front of the raid party. He, the ghost man, then lifted the visor of his helmet to reveal a face full of nothing but maliciousness. As soon as Jason saw this face, his emotions flared up with hatred and madness. "Cadiz Mareg. Aha, Jason Todd. Your little sister was quite the masterpiece," the ghost man laughed. That sentence alone made Jason completely explode with anger. He charged straight at the ghost man Cadiz with reckless abandon, only to be hit directly by an unbelievably fast skull on his way. The skull shattered into fine dust, while Jason's body was sent flying backwards and was quickly caught by Smick. "Run! Negary isn't dead!" Smick shouted in horror. He could already feel an impossibly malicious and ominous will slowly eroding his body, infecting his mind and replacing him. "Nala, are you hungry?" Isabella asked her in a low voice. They were currently inside one of Grosk's secret hideouts. As he was technically more a smuggler than a merchant, he naturally had his hands in plenty of unclean places, so for the sake of his own safety, he prepared quite a few secret hideouts to use as safe houses. "Let me prepare some food for you," Grosk consoled them. "We'll probably receive good news soon. Don't worry too much." "Thank you." Isabella spoke softly, but for some reason, she kept feeling a heavy, ominous feeling in her heart. But she had no choice but to hope that she was thinking too much. Nala Darkme stared at Grosk's back as he left. A tint of gold flashed over her eyes as her aura gradually changed. After leaving his hideout, Grosk's expression changed and revealed a hint of regret and guilt. He didn't go to prepare any food, but rather headed away from this place. After Grosk left, a group of expressionless men headed towards the hideout. They were the Intercam Kingdom's Black Ops, a group of hitmen specially employed under Seth I, people tasked with following Seth I's orders to perform things that he couldn't be publicly associated with. And their goal this time was to eliminate Nala, the prophesied saintress of salvation. The power struggles within a country had always been unpredictable, so if possible, it was preferable for him to eliminate all opposition. Suddenly, Isabella felt a bit of a headache. By the time she realized something was wrong, she was already too tired to even lift a finger and fell unconscious. Nala, no, currently, it should be Negary, opened her golden eyes and glanced at the door. The materials for the soul's blood came from Nala's dragon's blood. So soul's blood and dragon's blood were currently two sides of the same coin. Since a long while ago, the impurities within Nala's soul had been constantly absorbed and formed into Nala's second personality of Negary, while the original Nala became purer and purer as the days went by. But in the end, the thing flowing inside Nala's body was dragon's blood, not soul's blood. Negary was only a visitor within her body. If his understanding and control over the soul didn't vastly surpass Nala, he wouldn't have been able to come out and control her body like this. The squad of Black Ops didn't say a word and directly broke down the door, brandishing their weapons at their target. Even if the target was a cute little girl barely 10 years old, these people would feel no extraneous emotions such as pity. Old men or young girls, a prostitute or a scholar, as long as they were the target, then they will be killed no matter what. However, as soon as they charged in, they saw the young girl giggling. An abrupt sense of fear that came straight from their hearts engulfed the minds and bodies of these Black Ops hitmen. Even though they had gone through countless training and assassinations to shave away most of their emotions, becoming assassins who only had their mission in mind, they couldn't help but be frightened by this fear that came from the soul. In that split second, the Black Ops hitman leader instinctively stopped his movements, but it was already too late. Food with barely any emotions left. If you're so stale that you can't even serve as food, just Negary breathed in and abruptly vanished from their sights. During his battle with Smick, even as a disposable avatar filled with fighting spirit, Negary still had over 18 chances to kill him, yet he was still kept alive for so long. Obviously, it was to take his light inheritance. Under Negary's field of perception, the secrets of the light inheritance were laid completely bare to him. The thin white hand pierced straight through the throat of the Black Ops agent, without a pause, while his blood was still spilling out. Negary had appeared in front of the next Black Ops agent and killed him without hesitation as well. In just a few minutes, the entire squad of Black Ops were dead. This was Negary's code of conduct, plain and simple without any extraneous emotions. If they were useful, he would even give a part of his soul away. If they were useless, then they could simply die. Negary called the flock of cawing crows down from the sky to clean up these bodies, then cleaned the blood off his hands and slowly sunk back into Nala's blood. Even though his soul's blood was already considered a finished product, Nala was still a crucial experimental specimen. Otherwise, Negary wouldn't have come out at this point in time to take control over her body. Smick quickly brought Jason and went away to escape. Smick was already infected by the soul's blood, so he could easily be let go. Lwyn still had the potential to become top-tier food, so it was still too early to kill him. At the same time, Negary needed him to take Nala back to Intercam. As for Jason, having been struck directly by the skull thrown by Connor Kenway, his inner organs had been mostly destroyed and would probably not survive for too long. If he could survive, then he had the potential to become the most excellent dish. On the other hand, if he died in Rhea, his remnant soul wouldn't be able to escape either way. Noah brought Chris' remnant's soul towards Meyerson, who was now kneeling on the ground. At this point, Meyerson had become completely fallen, having indirectly caused Augustine's death. He had gone past the point of no return and could only fall even deeper. And with Circumflex B, Lord Negary has made the arrangements for you. Noah stepped in front of Meyerson and slowly told him, receive Chris's remnant soul and become the leader of the Ghost Men. Ghost Men? Indeed, the Crowmen were people who were implanted with the Black Crow germs. Because of their stagnation, they have already been thoroughly destroyed during this battle and would soon undergo reorganization, Noah explained. While the Ghost Men are a new group of soldiers completely different from the Crowmen. At this point, there are only 3 official members. You will be the 4th and also their newly appointed leader. The so-called Ghost Men are people who are implanted with a secondary soul. Noah placed Chris' remnant soul in front of Meyerson. The secondary soul selected for you was Chris' remnant soul. You will obtain all of his abilities. Naturally, in order to successfully implant a remnant soul within yourself, you will first need to be modified into an undead. Your body will be thoroughly modified. Your heart, throat, head, and other human weaknesses will be thoroughly removed. You will no longer need to breathe and no longer need to eat or drink, Noah coldly continued. Naturally, you will also obtain the ability that you so desired, the ability derived from diseases. Thank you for your blessings, Lord Negary. Meyerson accepted Chris' remnant soul and said with a heavy tone. When Smick carried Jason to the Roya's Kingdom's base within Rhea, Jason was already unconscious. His life rhythm weakened so much that he could die at any moment. Wen had already left at some point, saying that he wanted to look for the Night of Divine Grace Rivers and quickly escape from Rhea, bringing Isabella and her daughter with him. As Smick looked down at Jason, he sighed, as comrades who had fought alongside one another to an extent, if possible, he didn't want to let Jason just die like this. As he glanced at the cutlass coated with a strange glow in his hand, a sudden thought appeared in Smick's mind. This blade can save Jason. Clutching his head, Smick immediately used respiratory art to check his own rhythm, but couldn't find Negary's extremely ominous rhythm anywhere. Instead, he found that his body was constantly growing considerably healthier, even almost breaking through the human limit. As a golden glint flashed in Smick's eyes, he lifted the cutlass and stabbed it straight through Jason's heart. Jason instantly opened both eyes wide, awoken from his limbo. He could tell that something about himself had completely changed. What is this? Meyerson scowled as he saw the black liquid in front of him. To become a ghostman, first your body needs to be modified to have the constitution of an undead, Noah explained. This bowl contains a unique strain of germs that will put you into a near-death state that will be better for modifying you into an undead. Don't worry, this transformation will not be hard. Understood? Meyerson had no choice, or to be more exact, this was part of his previous choice. As he swallowed the black liquid in the bowl, he felt a scorching sensation from his throat all the way down to his stomach. His breathing became difficult, as if his innards were melting away. Noah then drew a gleaming golden dagger and spoke with a sincere expression. This is the ceremonial blade. A dying person, when stabbed in the heart by this dagger, will become an undead. Naturally, without the accompanying drugs, this process would feel extremely insufferable. As the ceremonial blade stabbed into his heart, Meyerson felt the entire world become different. If before, the world around him was vibrant, then it was now completely silent, as if there was a barrier separating him from the world itself. The so-called undead are in fact people whose dying souls are kept in a constant state of nearly separating from their body through a special technique. In this state of near death, the importance of the vessel rapidly declines, thus eliminating the existence of the human body's common fatal weak points. And the only thing left that binds your soul to your body is the existence of my Lord on this ceremonial blade. Noah carefully put the ceremonial blade away, then prepared to implant Meyerson with Chris' remnant soul. The body of a living person couldn't possibly house two souls. Such a situation would normally only cause the two souls to pollute one another. Either the host soul would become polluted by the invading remnant soul, and their soul would be greatly altered, or the remnant soul would completely devour the host soul and take their true spirit for itself. But after becoming an undead, due to the existence of Negary's soul's blood, the two souls would be able to coexist peacefully. Most evil spirits are mindless and irrational, thus unable to exert the limit of their own power. Thus the ghost men were created for that purpose, Noah explained. Then his aura abruptly changed to give off an inhuman, ominous feeling. And from today onwards, you are the leader of the ghost men. Yes, Lord Negary. Meyerson felt the power coursing through him and obediently knelt down. Earlier, Sir Noah told me that the ghost men only have 4 people, including me. So besides Cadiz Mareg and Connor Kenway, who is the last member of the ghost men? An unreliable fellow. Killer Jack here. Find out more. As dawn came over Rhea, a man in a white hooded robe with an amiable face had already begun to hand out leaflets to the visiting merchants in town. If you disregarded his words and the things written on his leaflet, You'd mistake him for a clergyman from the Church of Divine Grace. Why do I feel like wearing a white robe doesn't suit me? Should I be wearing a full black outfit with belts and a mask? Meh, who cares? Jack muttered to himself doubtfully, then handed his leaflet to an auntie who was carrying food. Sister, Killer Jack, find out more. I don't know how to read, and I don't need to hire a killer, the auntie answered. That's because you don't understand. Sister, Jack insisted that she took his leaflet. The need to hire an assassin doesn't discriminate for men or women, young or old. Maybe someday your child might lose their life, and then you'll need me. Trust me, sister, a woman needs to know a hitman or two. You can ask my partner, Jack Hans. He's accomplished a feat worthy of his name that countless women wants to kill him for. Jack spoke with a serious expression. You know, Hans, those animals that think with their lower half. Lunatic scram. Don't mess with my business, or I'm going to call the enforcers, the auntie cursed at him. Business is so hard these days. Jack pulled his leaflet back and continued giving them out along the main road. A dirty middle-aged man who seemed a bit awkward hesitated for a long time before walking up to Jack and spoke respectfully. Lord Jack, the boss said that there's an important meeting and sent me to call you. Little B, go back and tell your boss that I have something important to do right now. I'm not going to some meeting. Jack glossed it over. Lord Jack, my name is Brown. Not Little B, the dirty middle-aged man weakly refuted him. But this meeting is really important. Boss said that you have to come. I got it. So it's finally my turn to take the stage. Then I'll leave handing out these leaflets to you. Don't be lazy now. Little B. Jack gave the stack of leaflets to Brown and spoke seriously. For now, the only official members of the Ghost Men are us four. The other affiliated troops partly come from my old pirate crew, and partly consisted of criminals who came to take refuge in Rhea. Cadi's Mareg sat on one side and explained the situation to Meyerson. He was not too convinced about this guy being their leader, but since the other party was selected by Lord Negary himself, even if he had any dissatisfaction, this wasn't the time to voice them. I've already sent someone to find Jack. He's also working as an assassin, so if nothing happens, he should be here soon. Cadi's continued. If not for a certain reason, I don't even want to come here. The white-robed Jack walked across the forest of bones while constantly looking up. What's up there? Meyerson asked. Nothing. I'm just afraid of the hammer suddenly falling from the sky, Jack murmured. Am I being unreasonable when I say that name should have been given to me as an assassin? Why the fat guy instead? Why did I learn to sneak around in the first place? Ignore him. When his secondary soul was implanted, something unexpected happened and caused his soul to become chaotic. He's always spouting some sort of tasteless joke or doing some inexplicable actions. Cadi's helplessly sighed. At this point, Jack came up to the fat man Connor Kenway and spoke with a serious expression. Hey, fatty, what do you think about using a hammer? Or maybe a greatsword? The killing business has been bad lately, so I'm planning to open up a weapon shop to make a few bucks. You want to pre-order a badge? The 5-meter-tall Connor remained silent without saying a word, completely ignoring Jack's banter. So, you must be our leader then. I'm the Ghostman King of Killers, Jack. Take care of me from now on. Until you become a box. I'll make sure to listen to your orders. Jack displayed a shamelessly malicious smile. Although Meyerson didn't quite understand what become a box meant, it was fine as long as he listened to orders. Meyerson nodded and lightly gave the orders. Lord Negary has given us our first mission. We of the Ghost Men shall move out and use the excuse of searching for Chris comrades, Smick Landsher, Wendonner, and the rest to sweep clean the other forces within Reastromia. At the same time, we will be recruiting more Ghost Men affiliate troops, all of whom will undergo the undead transformation, Meyerson slowly explained as an ominous dark glow appeared on his body.